Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The first time I noticed them was on a Saturday morning, early April. I had gone out to fill the bird feeder and saw these small patches on the lawn, maybe the size of a golf ball. Perfect little circles, about an inch across, slightly darker than the grass around them. At first, I thought it was just dead spots or maybe fertilizer burn, but I hadn't put anything down yet that season. I bent down and touched one. The grass wasn't just dead, it was crisp like it had been scorched. Not black or anything dramatic, but dry and brittle, like it had been hit with a heat lamp. The weird part was how uniform they were. Not random patches, not footprints or tire marks, just these neat little circles. There were 10 of them spaced exactly apart. 3 rows, then one more off to the side, like a corner that didn't get finished. I didn't think much of it at the time, figured maybe a kid left something hot in the yard, or someone threw out cigarette butts in the middle of the night. I have motion lights and the backyard's fenced in, but it's not Fort Knox. The next morning, I checked again, just out of curiosity. The circles were still there. Same size, same position. But now there were more. Another row, filling out the corner. It made a full square, 4 by 4. That's when I started to feel weird about it. I pulled up the security cam footage from the night before. I've got 2 cameras facing the yard, one on the back porch, one by the side gate. They run all night and save to a local drive. I watched the whole night on double speed. Nothing. Porch light flicked on a couple times from bugs, but no people, no animals, no movement near the grass, no flashes, no shadows, and definitely no one walking around placing things. I went back and watched the footage from the previous night. Same thing. No sign of anything. The next few nights, I left the cameras on as usual and tried not to think about it. But every morning, there were more circles. Always the same size, same spacing. The grid just kept growing. By the 4th morning, it had expanded to cover almost half the yard. Perfect rows, maybe an inch deep at most. No tracks leading to or from them. No footprints, no disturbances, just the circles. I finally called my neighbor Matt, the guy whose yard borders mine on the backside. He's a retired mechanic, keeps to himself, but friendly. I asked if he'd seen anything strange in his yard. He said no. Nothing on his grass, and no noises or lights or anything during the night. I asked if he had cameras, but he doesn't. I showed him my yard, and he just stared at it for a minute before saying, "That's not natural." I didn't know how to respond. I agreed, obviously, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it feel heavier somehow. That night, I stayed up, made coffee, sat by the back door with the porch light off, curtains cracked just enough to see the yard. It was quiet, a little wind, a couple owls, nothing unusual. Around 3:20 a.m., the motion light on the far side of the yard blinked on. Just for a second, I leaned forward, squinting. Nothing moved. It went dark again. I waited another hour. No more lights, no sound. I checked the cameras again in the morning, same as before. No change except for 8 new circles in the grid. Same perfect spacing. I started measuring them with a tape. Each circle was 12 inches apart from center to center, like a grid laid out by a machine. No variation. I even tried marking the newest row with little flags to see if anything disturbed them. Next morning, the flags were still there, and the circles had been burned in between them, like something passed right through without knocking them over. At this point, I wasn't sleeping well. I'd check the yard constantly, sometimes shining a flashlight out there in the middle of the night. Never saw a thing. One night, I left a cheap drone hovering over the yard for a couple hours. I rigged a GoPro to it with a power bank, set it to record. When I checked the footage in the morning, it had recorded just fine, up until exactly 2:47 a.m. Then static, full-on snow, like old TV interference. No image, no sound. It stayed that way until 3:12 a.m., then picked up again like nothing happened. Just lawn. The timestamps were fine. It didn't cut out, just static for 25 minutes. That was the same night I found 3 of the little burn marks on my front lawn. I don't even have cameras facing that way. No one could have gotten out front without tripping at least one of the driveway lights, and they didn't. The next day, I brought it up with the HOA, not like a formal complaint, just asked if anyone else had seen weird patterns in their yards. Got some chuckles. A couple people joked about crop circles. One woman, Julia, asked if I meant brown spots. I said no, and described what I'd seen. She got quiet and said she'd had a few small circles near her back fence too, but just figured it was fungus or something. I drove over that afternoon. She lives 4 streets down, and she showed me. They weren't as many, maybe 6 or 7, but same size, same shape. She didn't have cameras either. By mid-May, the circles in my yard had stopped. They didn't fade, just stayed exactly how they were, like they'd been etched in. I even had a lawn guy come out to look. He couldn't explain it. Said it didn't match any kind of lawn disease or pest damage he'd ever seen. Said the soil underneath looked fine. We tried reseeding one of the circles. Nothing grew. The seeds just sat there like the dirt underneath wasn't real soil anymore. Eventually, I stopped checking every morning. They weren't spreading anymore, and it felt worse to obsess over it. But every once in a while, I'd wake up around 3 a.m. for no reason. No noise, no dream. Just wide awake, like something had tapped me on the shoulder. I don't look out the window anymore when that happens. I was sitting in my truck in the grocery store parking lot when I noticed the missed call. No number, just unknown. The timestamp said 2:37 p.m. It was 2:52 when I saw it, and I hadn't heard the phone ring. Reception's spotty in town, but I usually get voicemails when that happens. This one showed up without a notification, just there in my call log like it had always been. I hit play, expecting maybe a butt dial or robocall. Instead, I got static, low and broken, like an old radio trying to tune in. Then this clicking started, mechanical, sharp but uneven, like a loose gear catching every few seconds. I was about to delete it when I heard something else, a whisper. Not loud, just enough to catch. I leaned in, thinking maybe it was part of the interference. Then I recognized the voice. It was mine. It only said one word, or something that sounded like a word. Corin. I don't know what that means. I've never said it before, and I don't talk like that. The tone was off, quiet, breathy, like I was afraid of being heard. I sat there for a few seconds, phone in my hand, listening to it loop back. I played it again. Same static, same clicking, same whisper. I hadn't spoken to anyone all day. I was off work and had been at home until I came into town. No calls, no messages, nothing. And I definitely hadn't recorded anything. I don't even use voice memos. I backed out of the voicemail app and checked my call logs again. No number, no contact, just unknown at 2:37. I scrolled through my voicemails from the last few months, nothing like this. Most were normal stuff. Pharmacy reminders, my brother calling from the road, my mom forgetting the name of a movie. This one felt wrong. I drove home thinking maybe it was some kind of prank. But nobody has my number except friends, work, and family. I kept trying to think of a rational reason for what I'd heard. Pocket recording? Glitch? Maybe some kind of weird echo from a previous call? But that clicking didn't fit. And the voice, it didn't sound like me in the way a recording normally does. It sounded off, like it had been pushed through something. That night, I left my phone on the kitchen table and tried to forget about it. Made dinner, watched a couple episodes of some show I wasn't really paying attention to. Around midnight, I checked the phone again. No new calls or texts, but the battery had dropped from 82% to 14% even though it had just been sitting there. It was warm, too. Not hot, just like it had been running something. I checked battery usage. Nothing unusual. No apps running in the background. I charged it and went to bed. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up to a single vibration. Not a call or text, just one buzz. I grabbed the phone off the nightstand, but the screen was black. No notification, no alerts. I turned it on and checked everything. No new messages. The unknown voicemail was still there, same timestamp, still unplayable unless I opened it directly from the voicemail menu. If I tried to save or forward it, the file wouldn't load. It just spun. The next day, I showed it to a friend of mine who's more tech-savvy. He listened to it once and said it was probably just interference. Maybe my phone picked up a stray signal from a CB radio or something. I asked him if he heard the voice. He said yeah, but didn't think it sounded like me, more like someone doing an impression of me. That bugged me. We tried transferring the file to his laptop to clean it up, maybe isolate the voice, but the file wouldn't send. Not over text, email, Bluetooth, nothing. We even tried using a cable, but the phone wouldn't show the voicemail folder when we plugged it in. Just skipped over it like it didn't exist. That night, I left my phone in the living room and tried to sleep without it. Around 2:45, I woke up again. This time, not to a vibration, just this weird sense that someone had walked past the bedroom door. I don't know how else to explain it. The feeling you get when you just miss someone. I turned on the light and got up. Checked every room. Doors locked, windows shut, nothing missing or moved. The house was dead quiet, but the phone was lit up on the coffee table. No notification, just the screen on, like it had been tapped. I picked it up and the voicemail app was open. Not just open, the message was paused at the exact second my voice says the word, right there on the waveform. I closed it and powered the phone down completely. Left it off for the rest of the night. The next morning, I powered it back on. Everything was normal again. Voicemail was gone. Not in deleted messages, not in archives, just gone like it had never been there. I figured that was it. Glitch, freak moment, whatever. I let it go. 4 nights later, it happened again. Same time, around 2:40 a.m., I woke up with no real reason. Phone was off, completely shut down, but the screen was glowing. Not fully booted up, just the little battery icon and a dim backlight. I held the power button, but nothing happened. It wouldn't turn on or off. I left it alone, and the screen dimmed again after a minute. In the morning, it was back to normal. I powered it up. Everything worked fine, but my call log had a new unknown entry from 2:37 a.m. No voicemail this time. Just a blank entry, like a missed call that didn't ring. I started keeping the phone off at night, battery removed, put it in a drawer across the room. That helped for a while. Then one afternoon, I was doing laundry and heard something faint from the bedroom. Just this low crackling sound, like a record looping. I followed it to the drawer. Phone was still powered off, battery in my hand, but the speaker was letting out a low, rhythmic pop. 4 clicks, then silence. 4 clicks, then silence. Over and over. I dropped it in the garage after that and started using an old flip phone instead. Haven't charged the smartphone since. It's still out there in the cabinet, wrapped in a towel inside a shoebox, just in case. Sometimes I still wake up around 2:30 for no reason. Not every night, but often enough to notice. And when I do, I get this urge to say something. A word that feels like it's just out of reach, like it's on the tip of my tongue. But I never say it, I won't. The first time it happened, I thought it was just a glitch. Our backyard motion sensor light came on around midnight, right when the house was dead quiet. It was one of those basic floodlights with a little camera attached. We'd set it up because the neighborhood has had a few break-ins, and honestly, the light helped us feel a bit safer. But that night, the light flicked on without any noise or movement I could see. I glanced out the kitchen window, but didn't see a thing. At first, I just figured maybe it was an animal or a bug triggering the sensor. The yard has a lot of trees, and at night, shadows move with the wind. Nothing to worry about, I thought. But then it happened again, a few nights later. Same time, just after midnight. The light clicked on, the camera started recording, and then a minute later, it shut off. I checked the footage the next morning, but there was nothing. There was nothing. No figure, no shadow, no sign of movement at all. Just the empty yard, dark except for the light. My wife thought I was overthinking it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We talked about it a little, but she said maybe the camera was faulty or the sensor too sensitive. Then the light started going off at different times. 1:30 a.m., 3 a.m., even once close to 4 a.m. Each time, the same thing. The light flicked on, the camera recorded for a minute or two, then shut off. No sounds, no motion captured, nothing but an empty yard lit by the floodlight. What really got to me was how precise it was. The sensor never failed, but the camera never showed anything. It was like something was triggering the motion sensor, but whatever it was refused to be seen. We tried everything we could think of. Checked the sensor and camera, swapped the batteries, adjusted the angle, Even cleaned the lens, thinking maybe it was a bug crawling close to the sensor. Nothing changed. One night, I stayed up and watched from the kitchen window. The house was silent, the kids asleep, the streetlights casting long shadows across the lawn. Around 2:15 a.m., the light clicked on. I looked out, but saw nothing. I opened the door and stepped outside quietly. The air was cool and still. I scanned the yard carefully. Not a leaf moved. No animals. The grass was still. I thought maybe it was some kind of electrical interference or a false alarm, so I went back inside, but the feeling stayed with me. Then, a couple of nights later, the light came on again, but this time my phone buzzed. The motion sensor camera is linked to an app, and I get alerts when it triggers. I pulled up the live feed. The yard was empty, lit only by the harsh white floodlight. I zoomed in slowly, expecting to see something, a stray cat, a raccoon, anything. But the screen showed nothing but the still grass and shadows. I left the feed open for a few minutes, watching, waiting for some movement. But the camera stayed on the empty yard, the shadows flickering slightly with the breeze. And then, just as I was about to turn it off, I saw something odd. There was a slight distortion on the left edge of the frame, like a shimmer in the air. It was subtle, like heat rising off asphalt on a hot day, but it didn't feel warm outside. The distortion flickered for a second and then vanished. I blinked and looked again, but it was gone. I checked the footage after, rewound, and played it over and over. The distortion was there, just a faint, brief ripple, nothing more. That night, I barely slept. Over the next week, the motion sensor kept going off at strange times, sometimes twice in a row, sometimes with hours in between. Every time, the camera recorded nothing unusual. Just the empty yard, the trees swaying gently, the shadows of branches dancing in the floodlight. I even tried setting up a second camera from a different angle, hoping to catch whatever was triggering the sensor. The second camera was a regular security camera with night vision. For a few nights, nothing happened, but then the motion sensor tripped again, and the new camera showed nothing either. One night, I noticed something new. When the sensor went off around 3 a.m., I checked the footage, and the new camera's night vision showed an area of complete darkness. Not just dark, but like the night vision wasn't picking up any infrared reflection from that patch of the yard at all. It was like a hole in the night, right in the middle of the grass. The rest of the yard was clear, the trees and fence visible in shades of gray, but that spot was pure black. The next morning, I went out to the yard and looked closely at that spot. The grass was a little flattened, but otherwise normal. No scorch marks, no wetness, no sign anything was there. The thing is, that spot seemed to change slightly every time the motion sensor went off. Sometimes it was a little wider, sometimes narrower. Sometimes the grass looked more pressed down, sometimes less. I started waking up just before the sensor was due to trigger, around 2 or 3 a.m. The timing wasn't exact, but it was close enough to make me think it was on a schedule of some kind. One night, after another motion sensor alert, I stepped outside to see if I could spot anything unusual. The air was quiet and cold. The street was empty, the only sound my own footsteps on the pavement. I stood in the yard, eyes fixed on that black patch the camera had picked up. The grass looked normal, but something about it felt wrong. I didn't hear anything at first. Then, barely audible, a low humming started. It wasn't loud, more like a vibration you could feel in your chest than a sound your ears picked up. I looked around, trying to find the source, but there was nothing. The humming didn't move or get louder. It just hung in the air. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but the hair on my arms stood up and I felt cold, like when you're outside in the dark and someone's watching. The humming stopped after a minute, and the motion sensor light shut off too. I stayed outside a little longer, but everything was still and quiet again. The next day, I checked with the neighbors to see if anyone else had noticed anything weird. Nobody had. The street was quiet, normal, nothing strange reported. I began to question my own senses. Was I losing it? Was the sensor faulty? Was I just tired and making up stories? But every time the motion sensor went off, the cameras showed nothing but empty space. The black patch remained. The strange distortion flickered sometimes in the footage, like a heat wave or a ripple in reality. A few weeks later, I moved the camera to a different spot, angled differently, hoping to catch something new. The The sensor still triggered, same as before, at odd hours, always late at night. One night, after an alert at about 1:45 a.m., I opened the app and checked the live feed. For a moment, everything was normal. Then, right at the edge of the frame, I saw it again. The same faint shimmer, like air wavering over a hot road, but colder. I zoomed in, and my phone screen flickered. The shimmer stretched out briefly, like a thin shape moving slowly through the frame. I couldn't tell what it was. It wasn't solid or bright, just a bending of the air, a subtle change in the way light moved across the yard. The motion sensor light stayed on for 2 minutes before shutting off. The shimmer disappeared. I sat there in the dark, phone in hand, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The rest of the night passed quietly. After that, the sensor's pattern didn't change. It kept coming on at random late-night hours, the camera never showing anything concrete, just the empty yard and that strange distortion flickering at the edges. I didn't tell anyone much about it after a while. My wife asked if I was okay, but I just said the camera was acting up again. Some nights I would just watch from inside the house, staring at the yard through the window, waiting for the light to flick on. It did, every time. But the thing that set me on edge the most was that nothing ever moved in the yard when the sensor triggered. No animals, no shadows, no people, just a quiet yard bathed in artificial light. And the feeling that something was there, watching, but never showing itself. It started the morning after I got back from a late night out. I woke up, groggy, checked my phone, and noticed the time was just after 6 a.m. I looked down at my wrist and caught the watch I always wear. It had stopped. The second hand was frozen exactly at 3:33 a.m. That alone was odd, but what really got me was the phone. I always keep my screen on overnight to track my sleep and notifications. I pulled up the logs, and there was this weird gap, 27 minutes exactly, where nothing was recorded. No screen activity, no notifications, no movement at all. Like my phone had just shut off and turned back on silently. I'm not super into conspiracy theories or UFO stuff, so at first I thought maybe my watch battery died or the phone glitched, but it was a new watch and it had never stopped before. Also, my phone battery was almost full when I went to bed, and the gap didn't match any kind of restart I ever saw. I didn't think too much of it that day, but when I looked again that evening, the watch was still stuck at 3:33. I tried resetting it, but it wouldn't move. The phone was working fine now, but that gap stayed the same in the logs. Nothing weird happened for the rest of the day, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. That night, I went to bed around 11:30 p.m. Like usual, I left my phone on the nightstand and glanced at my watch just before shutting off the light. It was still stuck on 3:33. That's when I noticed the silence in the room was different, heavier somehow. It felt like the air had weight. I rolled over, eyes closed, but couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to the watch and the gap in the phone. Then I heard it, a soft buzzing sound, almost like a radio tuning between stations, but faint. I turned my head slowly toward the window, but there was nothing out there but darkness. The buzzing stopped as quickly as it started, and I figured maybe it was just tinnitus or something in my ears. Still, I couldn't get comfortable. I kept checking the watch, willing it to move, but 3:33 was frozen in place. Over the next few days, weird things started happening around the house. Lights flickered for no reason. Sometimes the thermostat would change on its own, and I could swear I saw shadows moving just outside the corner of my eye. But every time I looked directly, nothing was there. One evening, I was cooking dinner when I heard the buzzing again, louder this time, coming from the living room. I followed it, expecting maybe the old radio or one of the kitchen appliances acting up, but all the devices were off. The sound stopped as soon as I flicked on the light. I started recording on my phone, hoping to catch it again, but nothing showed up. No sound, no interference, no glitches. The watch never changed. It stayed frozen at 3:33. I took it to a watch repair shop, but they said it was fine internally. The battery was good, nothing mechanical was broken. They couldn't explain why it wouldn't tick past that exact time. That night, I was lying in bed, phone on the nightstand, watching the clock on the wall tick closer to 3:33 a.m. I kept waiting to see if the watch might move, but it stayed stuck. At exactly 3:33, my phone screen suddenly went black for a moment, then lit back up with no notifications or anything. I checked the logs the next morning and found another silent gap, this one exactly 27 minutes long, starting right at 3:33 a.m. I couldn't figure out what was happening. Was I losing time? Was the phone freezing and rebooting silently? Was the watch somehow tied to this? One night I stayed up, determined to catch whatever was going on. I sat in my living room with my phone recording audio and video, and the watch on the table in front of me. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2 a.m., and still the watch wouldn't move. The buzzing came and went again, soft, almost a whisper, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. When the clock hit 3:33, the buzzing got louder, like a swarm of bees, but inside my head rather than in the room. My phone screen flickered, then the recording paused for exactly 27 minutes before resuming. The watch still showed 3:33. After that, I stopped wearing the watch. I kept it in a drawer, but every time I saw it, I felt uneasy. The phone's silent gaps kept appearing, always 27 minutes long, always starting at 3:33 a.m., but nothing else ever happened. No messages, no calls, just that blank space in time. I checked the watch one morning a few weeks later, and the second hand was moving again. It had somehow reset to the current time, like nothing had happened. The phone log showed normal activity during that same period. I still don't know what was real or what wasn't. All I know is that for those weeks, something was happening in that tiny stretch of time every night. And the watch was frozen like it was marking that moment. I don't wear the watch anymore, but sometimes I'll glance at a clock or my phone around 3:33 and feel that same odd weight in the air, like the world is holding its breath for just a bit longer. I was about halfway through a solo hike up in the national forest, somewhere off the beaten path I'd been meaning to check out for a while. The day had started normal enough, clear skies, a bit cooler than I expected for late spring, and the usual sounds of birds and wind through the trees. I'd been snapping photos here and there just to document the hike, nothing special. I like to take pictures of the scenery, the little details that most people don't notice. Around mid-afternoon, I reached a clearing near the ridge. The view was pretty great. You could see the valley stretching out below, a patchwork of trees and farmland fading into the distance. I pulled out my camera and started taking shots, turning slowly to get different angles. It was one of those moments where everything felt calm and kind of perfect. Then, right as I pressed the shutter for what I thought was going to be a good wide shot, my camera caught this sudden flash. It wasn't from the sun or a reflection, not anything natural I could identify. Just a sharp, silent burst of white light, like someone snapped a photo at the same time from a different angle, but there was no one there. I blinked, looked around, but I was alone. No people, no animals, just the empty clearing. I checked the screen on the camera. The photo showed the flash right over the treetops, but when I looked in that direction with my own eyes, nothing was there. No light source, no movement, just the usual green and brown of the forest. I shrugged it off at first, maybe a camera glitch or a reflection from a lens flare, but it felt off. The kind of off that makes your skin crawl just a little. I packed up the camera and started back down the trail, but almost immediately, a low, thin mist began to roll in. It came fast, creeping along the ground first, then slowly thickening until I was walking through a fog that limited my visibility to maybe 15 feet. The temperature dropped noticeably too, even though the sun was still out. The mist made everything quiet. Birds stopped singing, leaves stopped rustling. I could barely hear my own footsteps on the dirt path. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. That's when I started feeling it, this intense sense of being watched. Not just a vague feeling, but something pressing and heavy, like eyes locked on me from all directions. I turned around several times, scanning through the fog and the trees, but I never saw anything. Just shadows, shapes that could have been anything or nothing. I kept moving, trying to tell myself it was just nerves or my imagination. But the feeling didn't go away. It got worse as I went on. At one point, I stopped near a fallen log to catch my breath. I pulled out the camera to check the photos again, hoping the flash might show up one more time, or maybe catch something I couldn't see. But when I looked at the last few shots, the camera had started glitching. The screen flickered, pictures corrupted into static or lines. I tried turning it off and on, but it didn't help. The mist grew denser, swirling softly around the tree trunks like it was alive. It made the trail harder to follow. I realized I didn't remember seeing any markers for the path in a while. No blazes on the trees, no worn spots on the ground. It was like the trail just disappeared. I felt my heartbeat speed up. I tried to stay calm, telling myself the trail couldn't just vanish. I looked ahead and saw a faint shape in the fog, maybe a rock formation or an old stump. As I moved closer, it shifted slightly, almost like it was watching me too. I decided to stop and wait a bit, hoping the mist would clear. I sat on a rock and tried to breathe, but the silence was deafening. No birds, no wind, no insects, just the mist curling and thickening. After what felt like maybe 20 minutes, the mist started to thin. I stood up and tried to pick out the trail again. That's when I noticed something else. My watch wasn't working right. The hands were spinning slowly like it was stuck in a loop, but the digital time was completely blank. I pulled out my phone, no signal, no GPS, just a black screen. I started walking again, slower this time, eyes wide open. I wasn't sure if I was moving forward or just circling around. The feeling of being watched stuck with me, heavier with every step. Then I saw it, a small cluster of lights through the fog, flickering softly. They weren't like any campfire or lantern I'd seen before. They pulsed gently, white and blue, almost like fireflies, but too big, too steady. I tried calling out, but my voice felt weak, swallowed by the mist. I took a few steps toward the lights. They didn't move, but as I got closer, the feeling in my chest tightened like something was pressing down on me. I stopped and looked around again. No movement, no shapes, just those lights, watching. Suddenly, the lights blinked out all at once. The mist thickened again, and everything went dark. I reached for my flashlight, but the batteries were dead. I moved cautiously, feeling my way back the way I thought I came. After a few minutes, the mist began to lift slowly, the trees becoming clearer. My watch had stopped spinning, showing the correct time again. I didn't know how long I'd been in that fog. My phone came back to life with full bars. The camera worked again too, but all the pictures from the misty part of the hike were blank, just black frames. I got back to my car as the sun was setting. The normal sounds of the forest returned. Birds calling, leaves rustling, a distant dog barking. I didn't say anything to anyone for a while. I wasn't sure if I wanted to. Some days later, I went through the photos again. The one with the flash of white light was still there, staring back at me like a question I couldn't answer. I still don't know what it was or why the mist came out of nowhere. The way the forest went silent, the way I felt watched but never saw anyone. It was real though, and I've been back to that spot a few times since. Nothing else happened, but I don't think I'll ever forget how it felt. Like something was just beyond the edge of sight, waiting. I woke up early like usual and grabbed my coffee from the kitchen. It was still dark outside, the kind of early morning where the sky hangs heavy and the world feels extra quiet. I was planning to check the farthest field, the one I barely use anymore. Last year I let it rest, didn't plan anything there. Figured I'd just mow the weeds down before summer really kicked in. When I stepped outside, the air was cool, but still sticky from the day before. The house was the usual mess of shadows and creaks, the kind of silence that fills a place where nothing's happened yet. I grabbed my flashlight and keys, tossed on my jacket, and walked out to the truck. The drive to the field was maybe a 10-minute ride on a gravel road, winding past a few old barns and patches of woods. The moon was low and clouded over, casting a dim, pale light. I parked at the edge and stepped out. The air smelled like earth and grass and something faintly sweet, maybe wildflowers coming up. I started walking across the field toward the back corner where the grass was thicker and wild. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was some kind of burn mark or old tire tracks. But as I got closer, the shape became clear, like a huge, perfect circle, maybe 30 feet across, pressed flat into the grass and weeds. The edges were sharp, clean like someone had taken scissors to it. Not a blade of grass sticking out, not a broken stem, just perfectly flattened plants forming this circle. I looked around for tracks, anything that would explain it. No footprints, no tire marks, nothing. The soil was undisturbed around it, no crushed weeds leading in or out. I circled it twice, shining my flashlight over every inch. It was just there. I kept looking for a prank or some stupid kid's project, but this field is far out, not near any roads or houses. I'd have noticed if someone had come in. And the grass was wet with dew, untouched except where it lay pressed flat inside the circle. I felt the hairs on my arms rise, but told myself it was just nature doing something weird. Maybe the wind or rain pressed it down. But the shape was way too precise for that. I crouched down and ran my hand over the grass. It wasn't dry or brittle, more like it had been gently pushed down overnight, but firm, like it was still holding shape. I stood up and looked at the sky. The clouds had started to break apart and a few stars peeked through. The moon was almost gone now. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the screen went fuzzy and dimmed on its own. I shook it and tried again. Same thing. The battery was fine, but the screen looked like static. Weird. I put the phone away and turned around slowly. The field behind me was pitch black, but I thought I saw movement at the tree line, like a shadow shifting between the trees. I blinked hard and turned my flashlight that way, but there was nothing. The field was quiet, except for the distant sound of a tractor working somewhere else on the farm. I started walking back, but something made me stop. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the circle again, faint in the moonlight. It almost looked like it was glowing slightly, but when I blinked, the glow was gone. I got back to the truck and sat inside for a moment. My hands were sweaty. I kept staring out the window at the field, but the circle was hard to see from this far away. I called my neighbor Dave, figured maybe he'd seen something, but he was out checking fences and hadn't noticed anything unusual. I didn't want to mention the circle just yet. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things. I drove back toward the house, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw a light flicker near the edge of the field, a faint white pulse that vanished before I could focus. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the circle, the way the grass was perfectly pressed, no tracks, no explanation. I got up a couple times to look out the window. The field was dark, just the stars overhead, and no sign of anything else. The next morning, I went back with a couple friends from town who were curious. We walked out to the circle again. The grass was still pressed flat, edges just as sharp. We looked around for footprints, for anything unusual, but the ground was dry and undisturbed. One of my friends swore they saw a faint smell, like ozone or burnt rubber, but I didn't notice it. We joked about aliens and crop circles, but I didn't laugh. It didn't feel funny. The shape wasn't the usual messy, silly stuff you see in TV shows. It was precise, neat, like it had been laid down carefully. Later that day, I went to town to grab supplies and stopped by the feed store. The guy at the counter asked if I'd heard about the strange lights some people saw last night over the county line. No details, just weird lights. I didn't say anything about the circle. I got home and checked the field again. The circle hadn't changed. The grass hadn't grown or moved. It looked like it had just been pressed flat overnight and stayed that way. Over the next few days, I kept going out to the field trying to figure out what made the circle. Sometimes I'd hear sounds, low hums or soft crackles, but when I stopped to listen, everything was silent. One night, I left a camera pointed at the circle, hoping to catch whoever or whatever might be responsible. The next morning, I found the memory card missing from the camera. I checked the whole field, the surrounding trees, the dirt road. No sign of it. The camera was still mounted, but the card slot was empty. That same night, I thought I saw a dim light moving slowly in the distance, just beyond the tree line. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward it, but it vanished before I got close. No sound, no sign anyone was there. The weirdness kept building. On some nights, my phone would lose signal completely while I was out near the field, even though there's usually at least one bar. Other times the stars would seem brighter, sharper, almost like the sky was different somehow. I kept telling myself it was my imagination, that the stress of farming was getting to me. One morning I noticed my watch was off by several hours. I was certain it was noon, but the watch said 3 a.m. I reset it and figured the battery might be dying. But the next day, the same thing happened with different times. I asked some folks at the local diner if anyone else had experienced strange time shifts or odd lights. Some laughed. Others said the power grid around here was old and glitchy. No one mentioned crop circles. A week after I first found it, I drove out to the field at dusk. The sky was fading and the air was heavy with moisture. As I walked in, the circle looked darker than before, almost like it absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. I stood in the center and suddenly felt cold, like a breeze had whipped through, even though the air was still. I turned to leave, but the silence around me felt thick, like something was watching. I blinked, and at the edge of the circle, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow slipping between trees. I called out, but only the wind answered. I got back in my truck and started to drive home. But on the road, my headlights flickered briefly, and for a second, the whole dashboard went dark. I pulled over, waited a minute, then everything came back on like nothing happened. By the time I reached the house, the sky was black and full of stars. I locked the doors and sat inside, thinking about the field and the circle. I don't know what made it or why it's there. Nobody else around seems to have noticed. It's still out there, pressed flat and quiet. And sometimes when I'm out late and the wind's just right, I swear I can hear that low hum again, faint and strange, coming from the far corner of the field. We first noticed it about 3 weeks ago. My girlfriend, Anna, and I had just finished dinner and were sitting out on the back porch of my place, which is in a pretty quiet spot on the edge of town. There's a hill maybe 2 miles away, not much on it except trees and a single radio tower with a blinking red light on top. At least, that's what we thought it was. It was around 10:15 p.m., and I was just about to get up and head inside when Anna pointed at the hill. "Look," she said, "do you see that light over there?" I turned to the hill, and sure enough, there was a small light near the summit, flickering in a slow, deliberate way. At first, I assumed it was the usual blinking tower light, but this was different. It wasn't blinking on and off rapidly like those hazard lights. Instead, it pulsed slowly, 3 pulses in a row, spaced evenly apart, then nothing for a while. Then 3 more pulses, over and over. We watched it for a few minutes. The pulses were soft, not super bright, almost like a dim beacon. It felt kind of deliberate, like a pattern, not random at all. But there was no other light on the tower, just that single faint glow. We started paying attention every night after that, and the pattern never changed. 3 slow pulses, pause, 3 slow pulses again. Same time every night too, like clockwork around 10:15 p.m. No matter the weather or the moon phase, it showed up the same way. After a few nights, I got curious enough to check it out with binoculars. From my porch, it was just a tiny dot, but through the binoculars, it was clear the light wasn't coming from a blinking beacon like I thought. It looked almost like, I don't know, a soft orb, kind of hovering just above the treetops. It didn't move much, but it didn't look like it was attached to anything solid either. I tried to tell myself it was just some weird reflection or a trick of the eye, but the timing made it hard to explain. It started exactly on schedule each night, lasting about a minute before disappearing. On one of those nights, Anna suggested I take my camera outside and record it. I grabbed my DSLR with the zoom lens and pointed it toward the hill. The light showed up faintly in the video, pulsing 3 times, then fading away. We watched the playback frame by frame and noticed something odd. The light's edges were perfectly sharp, no blur or distortion, which was weird for something that far away and flickering. A few nights later, Anna and I drove closer to the hill, hoping to find out what the light actually was. We parked at the base and started walking up the dirt path, leading toward the summit, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The woods were quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves. As we got higher, I started feeling like we weren't alone. I kept glancing behind us, half expecting to see someone, but the trail was empty. The trees cast long shadows that flickered with our flashlight beams, but there was no sign of any people or animals. When we reached a small clearing about halfway up, we stopped and looked back down the hill toward the town lights. The air was still, and the sky was clear. The light on the summit was out. No pulses, nothing. We waited for what felt like maybe 20 minutes. Then, just as my watch hit 10:15 p.m., the light appeared again. 3 slow pulses, exactly like before. But this time something else happened. The air got colder suddenly, like a quick chill ran down my spine. I looked at Anna, and she was staring at the light too, her face pale. That's when I noticed a second light, faint and steady, lower down the hill, closer to the trees. It was almost invisible at first, like a weak star struggling to shine through the branches. It didn't pulse, just stayed there, glowing softly. We didn't say anything. Neither of us moved. The 3 pulses stopped, and the lower lights stayed on for a few minutes before vanishing silently. We didn't stick around after that. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I swear, at one point, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving just beyond the tree line. Something too big to be an animal, but it disappeared before I could get a clear look. Back in the car, Anna and I both stayed quiet. Neither of us wanted to admit how unnerved we were. Over the next week, we kept watching the hill from the porch. The main light stuck to its pattern. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses. But the second light came and went randomly, sometimes appearing right before or after the pulses, sometimes not at all. One night, I decided to drive up again, alone this time, to get a better look. I parked where the dirt road meets the last stretch of trees and climbed out with my flashlight and camera. The hill was steep and slippery in spots, the ground covered in fallen leaves. I was halfway up when I heard a faint humming sound, like electricity, low and constant. The hairs on my arms stood up and I stopped, scanning the woods with my light. The humming stopped suddenly, like someone flipped a switch. Ahead, the trees opened to a small plateau with scattered rocks and patches of grass. I shone my light around, but it felt wrong, like I was being watched from the shadows. Then the light pulses started again from the summit, glowing through the trees. I looked toward the glow and realized the pulsing light wasn't coming from the tower. The tower was dark. The light was somewhere else, just beyond the tree line, in a place where no path led. I pulled out my phone and tried to call Anna, but no signal. My breath fogged in the cold air as I stepped back down, feeling more exposed than I had all night. On the way down, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, quick and light, but when I turned, there was nothing. The next morning, I told Anna what I'd heard. She said she felt the same way the last time we were up there, like something was close but hidden. We agreed to stop going up the hill. A few days later, I checked the news. No reports of strange activity or people missing in the area, just the usual weather and local events. The light kept showing up, same pattern every night, even when I wasn't watching. Sometimes I catch myself glancing at the hill from my window, waiting for those 3 pulses, wondering what they mean or who's sending them. I don't know if anyone else sees it or if it means anything, but it's there, every night, like a message or a signal. And sometimes, when I'm outside late, I swear I hear a faint humming, just on the edge of hearing, as if the hill itself is alive, watching. I went hunting alone in late November, out near Red Pines. It's a big stretch of public land in the Northwoods, mostly thick trees with a few old logging roads and deer trails crisscrossing the area. I'd been there a bunch of times before, but always with someone else. This time I went by myself. I got out there just after dawn, parked off a side road, and hiked in a few miles. I wanted to get away from the other hunters. It was quiet, no trucks, no gunshots in the distance. The kind of quiet that makes you notice every little sound. Wind through the trees, your own breathing, boots crunching frozen ground. I didn't see any deer that morning, but I found some decent tracks, fresh ones, and decided to follow them deeper in. I wasn't using GPS or anything, just a paper map and a compass. I like doing it the old way. I wasn't worried about getting lost. Around 10 or 11, I stopped for a snack and sat on a fallen log. That's when I started to notice something weird. I saw my own boot prints in the dirt nearby. At first I thought, okay, maybe I looped back by accident, but I checked my compass and the sun, and I was still heading northeast, hadn't turned around. I kept walking. The woods started to feel off. It's hard to explain. The trees looked the same as always, but there was this feeling like I was being watched. I brushed it off as just being alone in the woods. That happens sometimes. About 30 minutes later, I came to a low ridge and climbed it to get my bearings. From the top, I could see a small clearing below and more of my own tracks. They curved through the snow at the edge of the clearing like a big arc. I walked down to look closer, and it hit me. The trail I was following was mine. Same tread pattern, same spacing, same slight drag in my right heel. I knelt down and checked the impressions. They were recent. No snow had fallen on them, no frost in the prints. They couldn't have been more than an hour old, but I'd never turned around. I was sure of that. I pulled out my compass again, still pointed northeast. I backtracked about 20 yards and looked at the pattern. The trail I'd just made had merged back into the one I was following, perfectly. Same direction, same orientation. Like I'd walked in a giant loop without knowing it. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe the terrain had subtly curved. Maybe I'd misread my compass earlier. But I'd been paying attention, and I wasn't bushwhacking. I was following game trails in a mostly straight line. I decided to head back to the car. I marked a tree with some orange flagging tape so I could tell if I passed it again. About an hour later, I saw the same tree again, same flag, same torn bark. That's when I really started to get nervous. I checked my map, compass, everything. It all still said I was heading west now, toward the road, but somehow I'd come back to the same spot again. I hadn't backtracked. I would have noticed. I stopped and listened. No animals, no birds, just dead quiet. That's when I heard the crunching, slow footsteps in the snow coming from the trees behind me. I turned fast, hand on my rifle. Nothing there, just empty woods. I called out, thinking maybe it was another hunter, but nobody answered. I waited. The sound didn't come back. I stood there for a while, scanning the tree line, but it was empty. I started walking faster after that, trying to get to the road. I figured if I kept going in a straight line, I'd eventually hit it. But this started dipping low, and the light was fading fast. I'd already burned most of the day. Then I saw something up ahead, a glint of light through the trees. Not like sunlight. It was steady, pale. Not bright, just there. I approached slowly. It was maybe 50 yards off, hovering low, right above the ground. 3 soft white lights in a straight line, like someone holding a flashlight sideways, but they weren't moving. I crouched behind a stump and watched. The lights didn't flicker or bob, they just stayed there, maybe 5 or 6 feet off the ground. No sound, no movement. I sat there for what felt like minutes, just staring. Then, without warning, the lights went out, all at once. No fade, just gone. I waited. Nothing. I started moving again, slower this time, sticking close to trees. I felt completely turned around. Every part of the forest looked the same. Every tree, every dip in the land. At some point, I passed another set of my boot prints, not crossing my path, running parallel to it, like there was another version of me walking just off to the side. I stopped and followed those tracks for a few minutes. They matched mine exactly, down to the worn patch on the heel. Then they just stopped, not turned around, not faded, just stopped mid-step. One print, then nothing. Fresh snow around them untouched. That was the worst part, honestly. Just that empty space where the next footstep should have been. I turned back toward where I thought the road was and started walking fast, not even trying to be quiet anymore. I just wanted out. The sun was nearly down and the air was getting colder. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I heard something that didn't belong. The faint hum of a car engine in the distance. I kept going that way, and after a while, I finally saw the road through the trees. My truck was still there, parked where I'd left it. I didn't look back once, just got in, started the engine, and drove. When I got home, I checked the map again, tried to trace where I'd gone, but no matter how I plotted it, the loop didn't make sense. I shouldn't have ended up where I did, especially not twice. Not without realizing I'd turned. I went back out there once, months later, brought a buddy with me that time. We stayed close to the road, didn't see anything weird. But I didn't mention what had happened. Not then. I haven't been back since. I was heading home from work, standing on the platform at Glenhurst Station, like I did every weekday around 6:40 p.m. It was early March. Still cold, but the sun was starting to stick around a little longer, so there was this dim, bluish light in the sky. Not quite night, not quite day. The platform was maybe a third full. People were spread out, looking at their phones, listening to music, nothing unusual. I remember glancing down the tracks Not because I heard the train, it was still a few minutes out, but just out of habit. And that's when I saw it. It was hovering maybe 20 or 30 feet above the tracks, about halfway down the platform. I didn't hear it come in, no hum, no movement, just suddenly there, like it had been sitting still and I hadn't noticed until that second. It wasn't a drone. I know what drones look and sound like. This thing didn't move, didn't wobble, didn't make a sound. It wasn't shaped like anything I'd ever seen fly. Best way I can describe it, kind of oval, like a stretched out egg, standing upright. Almost transparent, but not quite. Like when you look through heat waves on asphalt and everything behind them sort of bends. That's how it looked, like something messing with the air around it. It had this faint shimmer around the edges. Not glowing, not flashing, just a soft, pulsing brightness. I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed. The woman standing near me was staring at it too, mouth slightly open. Then a guy with a backpack walked up next to us and did a double take, like he thought he was seeing things. "Do you see that?" the woman asked me, quietly. I nodded. Yeah. We just stood there watching it. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It felt wrong, though, like it was there, but not really. I don't know how else to put it. Then a guy in a suit down the platform held up his phone and started recording. A few others did too, so I took out mine, opened the camera, zoomed in, and nothing. The screen just showed the tracks and sky. The shimmer, the shape, gone. I thought maybe I was missing it. I wiped the lens, tried switching to video. Still nothing. It was like the camera couldn't see it. I looked over at the guy in the suit, and he was frowning at his phone too. The woman next to me held hers up. Saw the same thing. "You're not seeing it on yours, right?" she said. "No," I said. "It's not showing up. Mine either." Then the guy with the backpack said, "What the hell is that thing?" "I don't know," I said. We kept watching. It hadn't moved an inch. I don't know how long we stood there like that. Probably only a few minutes, but it felt longer. A few more people started noticing. You could feel this quiet ripple go through the platform, like people weren't sure if they were seeing the same thing or losing their minds. Then someone said, kind of loudly, "Okay, does anyone else see, like, a floating jelly bean with a halo around it?" And immediately 3 people said yes. That was the weirdest part. Everyone who saw it started describing it the same way. Jelly bean, egg-shaped, shimmering outline, wobbling air. Nobody said drone, nobody said balloon, nobody suggested a reflection. A couple people tried walking closer to it, not under it, but down the platform. It didn't react, it stayed right where it was. Then, out of nowhere, it just blinked out. Not like it flew off or faded. One second it was there, the next it wasn't. No sound, no trail, nothing. Everyone just kind of froze. Nobody spoke right away. I think we were waiting for it to come back. Then the train came in, just on time, like nothing had happened. Some people didn't get on. I noticed that. They just stood there, kind of staring at the spot where it had been. I got on, mostly out of habit. The woman who'd been standing next to me got on too. We ended up sitting across from each other. After a couple stops, I leaned forward and asked, "Did that just go away?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, like a light switch." The guy next to her leaned over and said, "I took a dozen photos. Nothing on any of them. Looks like empty sky." I checked my phone again. All my photos were the same. I even pulled them into an editing app to mess with the contrast. Nothing. But I remembered exactly where it had been. I even held up my phone and lined it up the spot and compared it to my picture. It should have been right there. The rest of the ride was quiet. People were clearly unsettled. No one talked much. Later that night, I checked local news sites, just in case someone else had reported it. Nothing. I posted on a small commuter forum about something odd seen over the tracks. Didn't mention anything specific, just to see if anyone else had seen it. 3 people messaged me, saying they were at Glenhurst and saw the same thing. All of them described it almost word for word the way I had. Jelly bean shaped, transparent, floating above the tracks. No sound. None of them had photos. One guy even said he thought he'd gotten a video, but it turned out to just be 30 seconds of him holding his phone up to an empty sky. The next evening, I went back early and stood at the same spot. Nothing. Just the usual rush of commuters, trains, cold wind. I started doing that for the next few days, standing there a little longer, keeping an eye on the same patch of sky. I didn't see it again. But once, around the fourth evening, I saw a man standing further down the platform, facing the tracks, not looking at his phone, not checking his watch, just staring straight ahead. He looked over at me, and I swear it felt like we both knew we were there for the same reason. Neither of us said anything. The train came, and we both got on. I'd been using the same spot in the field behind my house for stargazing for years. It's nothing special, just a fold-out lawn chair, a telescope on a cheap tripod, and an old thermos I keep full of coffee even in the summer. The sky out there stays pretty clear most nights, and the light pollution's low enough to see a good chunk of the Milky Way. I'm not a professional or anything, but I like cataloging what I see, sketching constellations, logging satellites, sometimes trying to catch meteor showers if I'm lucky. This started in early September. I remember that because the nights had just started cooling off and I'd finally started wearing a hoodie again. I was out around 10:30, pointing my telescope toward Cassiopeia. It's one of the easiest ones to find, and I'd been tracking a few double stars in that region. That's when I noticed something weird. One of the stars near the bottom arm of the W shape wasn't quite steady. It didn't flicker like atmospheric distortion. It had a rhythm to it. A faint pulse like a slow strobe. It wasn't bright enough to stand out unless you were really looking. I only caught it because I was sketching and it messed up my spacing. I glanced back and forth a few times, thinking it might have been a plane, but there was no movement. It just sat there, faint and steady between each flicker. I marked it with a question mark in the margin and moved on. The next night, same time, I checked again, and it was still there. Same brightness, same flicker. Only this time, it looked like it had shifted slightly. It wasn't aligned with the rest of the stars in that corner anymore. I thought maybe I'd logged it wrong the night before, so I pulled out the previous page and lined up the sketches. It had definitely moved, just a hair. But enough to notice if you were paying attention. I watched it for a solid 20 minutes. No movement while I was watching, just that weird, offbeat flicker. Nothing else in the sky blinked like that. By the third night, I was looking for it first thing. It had drifted even farther. Still in the general area of Cassiopeia, but now sitting just outside one of the main arms. I tried checking flight paths, satellite maps, even amateur forums. Nothing matched. No known satellite stayed in one area for that long, and it definitely wasn't a star. Stars don't move like that, not over 3 days. Around the 5th or 6th night, it really sank in how odd it was. It wasn't just the movement, it was how deliberate the movement seemed. Each night, it had drifted in the same direction by about the same distance. I started feeling weird about it. Not scared exactly, but uneasy, like it was doing something, tracking across the sky like it had a purpose. I told my friend Tom, who's into astronomy even more than me. He came out on the 7th night with his binoculars and saw it too. He couldn't explain it either. It's not a plane, he said, and it's not twinkling right. That flicker's too clean. We kept checking it together for a few nights after that. Same slow drift, same pulsing flicker. One night it didn't move at all, just sat there like it was waiting. That was the same night my telescope stopped focusing. Everything else in the sky was crisp, but when I turned it toward that spot, the image went soft. Not blurry, more like the lens didn't want to cooperate. I adjusted it every way I could. Still no clarity. Tom's binoculars were fine, but even he said it looked off. Like it wasn't there, exactly, just behind something. I tried taking a photo with my phone through the scope. Nothing showed up, just black sky. Even though I could see it with my eyes, the phone didn't register anything in that part of the image. We gave it a rest for a few days after that, maybe just to clear our heads. But when I went back out again, around the middle of the month, the thing had moved far enough that it was completely out of Cassiopeia. That's when I started noticing something new. Around 3 a.m., sometimes later, I'd see a faint streak in the sky, a fast, silent arc of light from the same region where the flickering point used to be. It wasn't a meteor, it moved too slow, and it didn't burn out. It looked more like, a shadow under the stars, something passing in front of them, like when a bird flies in front of a streetlight and you catch the silhouette, but higher and silent. I saw that maybe 3 times, spaced out over 2 weeks, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always in that part of the sky. After the third time, I noticed something else. My backyard motion light, the one that faces the field, started flicking on randomly around the same hours. I thought it was raccoons or deer, but when I checked, there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Once, I sat outside with the light unplugged, just watching. Around 3:15, I saw the flicker start again, only this time, closer. Not in the sky. Out over the field. It was faint, maybe 100 feet off the ground. Same soft pulse. No noise. It just hovered there for maybe 10 seconds, then faded. I didn't tell Tom about that. I didn't tell anyone. I stopped going out there at night for a while, but the next time I finally looked, weeks later, the star was gone. Not moved, not dimmed, just gone. And that patch of sky felt different. I don't even know how to describe it. Like my eyes wanted to skip over it, like it was too empty. I kept checking for a while after. I even bought a better scope, but nothing ever came back. The motion light still flicks on some nights though, always around 3 a.m., always when the sky's clear. I was up late one night, just like I usually am when I'm trying to get some photos of the stars. I've always been into amateur astronomy and night photography, so it's not unusual for me to be outside with my camera around midnight or later. This particular night, the sky was clear, really clear, and the stars looked perfect, so I set up my tripod in the backyard and started snapping away. Between midnight and about 2 in the morning, I took a bunch of pictures, just pointing the camera straight up or at different parts of the sky. It was the kind of calm, quiet night where the only sounds were a few distant cars and some rustling leaves. I felt completely alone out there, but in a good way. I like that kind of solitude. The next day, I loaded the photos onto my computer to check them out. Most looked exactly like you'd expect. Sharp stars, some constellations, a few satellites caught as tiny lines of light moving across the frame. But then I noticed something odd. In every photo taken between midnight and 2, there was this blurred triangular shape. It wasn't a sharp outline or a clear object, more like a smudge or a faint shadow, always somewhere near the center or just off to one side. It didn't move or change shape much, just there in every single shot. The color was strange too, sort of a dull gray with a faint glow around the edges, but nothing that looked like a lens flare or any typical camera artifact I've seen before. At first, I figured it had to be some kind of camera issue, maybe a dirty lens or a sensor problem. So I cleaned everything carefully, checked my settings, even took some test shots around sunset and during the day. No triangular shapes, just normal pictures. The night after, I set the camera up again, trying to catch the same part of the sky. I took photos at the same intervals between midnight and 2. When I looked at those pictures the next day, there it was again, the same blurry triangle, same size and shape in roughly the same spot. I started paying closer attention that night while I was outside. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things, but the feeling of being watched crept in slowly. Nothing obvious, no one standing in the shadows or anything, but the air got heavy in the backyard, like something was hovering just out of sight. I noticed the neighborhood was unusually quiet. No barking dogs, no distant traffic noises, just a strange, almost unnatural stillness. I glanced around a few times, but didn't see anyone. My phone was on silent, so no distractions, just the occasional click of the camera shutter and the low hum of my laptop inside. Then I started hearing it. A faint mechanical clicking sound. Not loud, more like something buried deep in the background noise of the night, but definitely there. It was steady, rhythmic, almost like a clock ticking, but more metallic. I tried to locate it, but it didn't get any closer or farther. It just stayed, steady and low. The clicking lasted for maybe 15 minutes. I told myself it was probably just something normal, a machine somewhere, maybe a generator in a neighbor's yard or a distant radio tower. But still, it didn't quite fit with how quiet everything else was. After a while, I put the camera down and went inside. I checked the photos again on my computer, just to make sure the triangle was still showing up. It was, in every shot from that time window. On the third night, I decided to bring my binoculars out with me and just watch the sky for a while, without the camera. The triangle shape wasn't visible to the naked eye or through the binoculars. The stars were perfectly normal. No blinking lights, no moving shapes, Nothing unusual. Still, I kept feeling like something was nearby, just out of reach, like an invisible presence hanging above the treetops, watching quietly. When I got back inside, I noticed something else weird. My phone had a few new notifications, messages from people I didn't know, just random numbers, and the messages were strange. A few symbols I didn't recognize, like scrambled letters or code, nothing readable. I deleted them, thinking it was spam, but then one more came in. This one was different. It was an audio file, no text, just a short clip. I listened to it. At first, there was static, then the same faint clicking sound I'd heard outside. Then, very quietly, a whisper. It was my own voice. But the word it said was something I didn't know, something that didn't make sense. It wasn't any language I recognized, just a soft, breathy syllable. I checked my phone logs to see if I'd called or recorded anything at that time. Nothing. I hadn't spoken to anyone in hours, hadn't used any apps that could have recorded sound. I started wondering if I was losing track of time or dreaming while awake, but nothing else felt off. My memory of the night was clear, except for some brief moments where I couldn't say what I was doing. The next day, I went back through the photos, the messages, the sound clip, trying to connect dots. The triangle shape on the pictures, the clicking sound, the strange message on my phone, all tied together somehow, but without any clear reason. I thought about showing the photos to a few friends, but I hesitated. I don't know if they'd believe me or just think it was a camera glitch or some prank. After that, the strange messages stopped. The clicking sound didn't come back, and the triangle shape disappeared from my photos. But the feeling stayed, the sense that something was there, watching, just beyond what I could see. I still look up at the stars sometimes, camera ready, hoping to catch it again, but it hasn't shown up since. I was working the night shift as a security guard at a small industrial park on the edge of town. It's the kind of place that's mostly empty overnight. A few warehouses, a couple of offices, and a fenced-off lot. The company was cheap on staff, so sometimes it was just me alone from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m., driving the rounds every hour, checking the doors and fences, making sure nothing was out of place. The radios they gave us were old, basic two-way models. Usually, they only crackled with static or the occasional check-in from the day crew or other guards, but on this particular night, things started getting weird. I was midway through my third round, cruising the lot in the company truck when the radio suddenly buzzed to life. It wasn't the usual beep or short burst. It was faint, almost like someone whispering. I turned the volume up, thinking maybe a guard was calling, but the voice wasn't clear. It was a soft murmur, almost indecipherable, buried in static. "Hello?" I said into my own radio, expecting some reply. Nothing but static. I fiddled with the channel button, flipping through the frequencies, but only silence and static answered me. The weird part was, I knew there weren't any other guards on duty. The schedule was posted on the break room wall, and I had checked before my shift. I was the only one out here after dark. I figured maybe the radio was picking up interference from something else. CB radios, truckers on the highway nearby, or even some random signal bouncing off the hills. That happens sometimes. But the whispers kept coming back every few minutes. They never lasted long, just a few seconds of those soft, breathy sounds, too quiet and jumbled to make out any words. At first, I tried to ignore it, focus on the job, walk the fence lines, check the loading docks, the doors. Everything looked normal. But every time the radio crackled with those whispers, I felt this strange tension tighten up in my chest, like someone was nearby, watching me, but staying just out of sight. On my fourth round, I parked the truck near one of the warehouses and stepped out to do a physical check of the back doors. The night was cool, and the area was quiet, except for distant sounds of traffic on the highway about a mile away. That's when the radio buzzed again, that same soft whispering. This time I caught a faint word, maybe help or run. I wasn't sure. I called out, "Who's there?" into the radio, half expecting nothing. No answer. Then I heard a sound from behind me, like a branch snapping. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but saw nothing but the shadows of tall grass and the dark outline of the warehouse. The whispering started again, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I climbed back into the truck and decided to call the main office to report the weird radio interference. I dialed on my cell, but the call wouldn't connect. No bars, just no service. That wasn't unusual deep in this part of the park, but it added to the unease. Back on the radio, the whispers kept appearing every few minutes, always the same faint, garbled murmurs like someone trying to speak but cutting off mid-word. At one point, the voice seemed clearer but distorted, like underwater. I remember hearing a phrase that sounded like, "Can you hear me?" I stared at the radio for a long time, wondering if I was losing it. By the sixth hour, the whispers were constant, overlapping, layered, like multiple voices talking at once, but no words made sense. I tried turning the radio off, then on again, thinking it might reset. When I powered it back up, the static was worse and the whispers seemed louder. The whole parking lot felt colder, heavier. I kept telling myself it was just a glitch or interference, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced around, eyes darting to the tree line beyond the fence, but saw nothing. I tried to call my supervisor on the company radio frequency, but no response. It was like I was alone. Later, I noticed the radio's small screen was flickering, sometimes showing scrambled letters and numbers, sometimes blank. The battery was draining unusually fast, even though it was fully charged when I started. I caught myself looking at the tree shadows more than the buildings. The whispers had stopped being whispers and now sounded like faint breathing mixed with the static. At some point, I started to wonder if the voices were coming from the radio at all, or if my mind was playing tricks, filling the silence. I kept checking my watch. Time was crawling, but the radio clock seemed to glitch, skipping seconds or freezing for a moment, then catching up. I thought about leaving early, but I needed to finish the shift. Besides, I wasn't sure what I'd do or where I'd go. The highway was a good half hour away on foot. Around 5 a.m., the whispering finally stopped. The radio was silent except for the usual static hum. I breathed easier, but still felt the weight of the night pressing in. I drove back to the main gate, double-checked the locks, and headed home as the sky began to lighten. When I got inside, I tossed the radio on the kitchen counter and didn't touch it again. I'm still not sure what I heard that night. Maybe interference from some unknown source, or maybe something else entirely. But every time I think about it, I remember that feeling. Like there was someone or something close by, just out of reach, listening. And that's the part I can't explain. I was driving home late one Friday night, taking the usual route through that stretch of highway that runs between the city and the outskirts. It's a quiet road, mostly 2 lanes, lined with trees on either side, and only a handful of streetlights here and there. I liked this drive. It was peaceful, nothing hectic, just me and the road. I wasn't in any hurry, just heading home after a late shift. About halfway through the drive, just as I passed that old gas station that's been closed for years, I noticed the digital clock on the big roadside billboard flicker. It's one of those big flashy billboards with bright LED numbers showing the time and temperature. It usually works fine, except sometimes when the power glitches, the clock resets or goes blank for a second. No big deal, right? But that night, the clock wasn't just flickering once or twice. It kept resetting. The numbers would show the time for a moment, then jump back to 12, then start counting up again. The glitching happened like clockwork, and every time the clock reset, I caught this bright light flashing across the sky, just above the treetops nearby. At first, I thought it might be a plane or a meteor. The light moved fast, a sharp streak, almost too fast to track with my eyes. It wasn't one of those slow-moving satellites or regular airplanes with blinking red and green lights. It was bright white, clean and sharp, and just as sudden as it appeared, it was gone. The weird part was the billboard clock glitching exactly every time the light crossed overhead. The numbers would reset at the same moment, like the light triggered it somehow. I slowed down and watched closely. The clock would run for maybe 30 seconds, then bam, reset to 12, right as the light zipped past. I pulled off to the shoulder to get a better look. The night was quiet except for the faint hum of the highway. I stepped out of the car and stared up. The stars were clear, nothing out of the ordinary, but every minute or so that same bright flash would streak across the sky. I tried to call someone, but my phone showed no signal. Weird for being this close to town. I flipped through my messages and photos. Everything was fine, but the clock kept glitching. I felt a little uneasy, like something wasn't right. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. The trees near the billboard seemed darker than the rest, like they were absorbing the light or something. I stared at them, but couldn't really make out any shapes or movement, just darkness. The clock reset again, and the light flashed across the sky. This time, I caught a faint hum, like a low-frequency vibration you feel more than hear. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I sat back in the car, trying to shake off the feeling. I told myself it was just some electrical interference messing with the billboard. Maybe a transformer nearby was going bad, and the light was something completely unrelated. Then the power on the billboard went out completely. The whole display went dark. The trees were pitch black, and that humming sound grew a little louder. I didn't hear any other cars, even though it was a weekend night when there's usually a few vehicles on the road. After maybe a minute of silence and darkness, the billboard lights came back on, but the clock was frozen, stuck at 12, and wouldn't change. I started the car and pulled back onto the road, glancing up at the sky as I went. The flashes stopped. No more bright streaks, no more humming. I tried my phone again. Signal was back. The time and date corrected themselves. The billboard clock finally ticked forward again, slowly counting the seconds as if nothing had happened. I don't know how long I'd been standing there or what exactly I'd seen. The whole thing lasted maybe 20 minutes. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the flashes to start again or for something else to show up in the trees. But nothing did. When I got home, I checked the local news and weather stations, but there was no mention of anything unusual in the area. No storms, no electrical outages, nothing. I haven't gone back to that spot since, but I drive that road every now and then. Sometimes I look at the billboard clock as I pass. It works fine now, just like it's supposed to. Still, every once in a while I swear I see a faint flicker or feel that same low hum for a second, like it's waiting to come back. I was out in the woods just past sunset trying to get some shots of deer and maybe a fox if I was lucky. I mostly do wildlife photography, nothing fancy, just the usual birds, deer, squirrels. That evening I had my usual gear with me, plus my infrared camera. I like to use the IR cam for night shots sometimes because it picks up heat signatures so you can see animals moving around in the dark, even if you can't spot them with your eyes. The forest where I was is pretty dense, with thick pine trees and underbrush. The trails are quiet, not many people go out there at night. I like it that way, peaceful and dark, except for the sounds of the forest. I set up my gear on a small clearing about half a mile in. The sun was just dipping below the horizon, the sky still faintly orange. I had my infrared camera running, watching the screen for any signs of animals. After about 20 minutes, I caught a few deer moving in the distance, their warm bodies glowing white on the IR screen. Normal stuff. Then something caught my eye. About 50 yards from where I was sitting, near a cluster of trees, the IR camera picked up a shape moving slowly through the forest. It was perfectly round, like a big circle drifting through the trees. The weird part was that it didn't show up like a normal heat signature. It was completely dark on the infrared, meaning no heat at all. Just a perfect black circle moving steadily along, like it was gliding. At first, I thought maybe it was a camera glitch or a shadow, but it moved smoothly and consistently, not like a bug crawling on the lens or a smudge. I switched my regular night vision on, just to see if I could catch a glimpse of it with my own eyes, but there was nothing there. No light, no shape, just the usual dark forest. The circle moved slowly, maybe a couple of feet per second, weaving between trees without breaking a branch or disturbing leaves. It felt unnatural, like something out of place. I watched it for a few minutes, trying to figure out if it was some kind of animal, but there's nothing round or flat that moves like that in the woods. I raised my voice to call out, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank or there was some equipment I didn't know about, but the forest just echoed my shout back at me. No answer. The shape disappeared after about 5 minutes, slowly moving toward a thicker part of the forest where the trees grow closer together. I kept watching, but it didn't come back out. I packed up my gear after that and started hiking back to the trailhead, but the whole time I kept feeling like I was being watched. Not just by animals, but something else. Every now and then, I thought I caught movement in the corner of my eye, like a shadow shifting between the trees. But when I looked directly, nothing was there. I checked the footage from the IR camera again once I got home. The black circle was there on every clip from that time, smooth, silent, heatless. I tried to find a natural explanation, maybe a cold object reflecting no heat, or a piece of plastic or something floating in the air, but it didn't make sense. It moved steadily on the ground, not falling or drifting in the wind. Since then, I've gone back to that spot a few times, usually around dusk. The forest feels different, heavier somehow. The air is colder than it should be, and that feeling of being watched is almost constant. I've seen the circle a couple more times, always moving the same slow way, always without heat or sound. I don't know what it is. It doesn't make any sense. But it's there, drifting through the trees just beyond the edge of what I can see or understand. It started around 2:15 a.m., the night after we got back from visiting my sister in Vermont. I remember the time because I just turned off a podcast and rolled over to sleep. The sound didn't come all at once. It built up slowly, like a truck in the distance, but deeper. Not a rumble, more like a tone. A low-frequency hum that I felt more in my chest than in my ears. At first, I thought it was our furnace acting up. It's done weird things before, but this felt different. The windows started to vibrate, lightly. Not rattling, just enough that I noticed the bedroom window flexing a little in the frame. I sat up and looked at my wife, but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling. "You hear that?" I asked. She nodded. "It's shaking the windows." I got out of bed and opened the blinds. The backyard was pitch black, no wind, no trees moving. But the hum got stronger, not louder, just more, present. It was like it was surrounding the house. Down the hall, our kid called out, "Dad?" I stepped into the hallway. "You okay, buddy?" I heard something. The wall was buzzing. I told him it was probably a plane or something and said I'd come check on him in a second. I walked through the house, living room, kitchen, nothing looked out of place. But the sound was still there, not coming from any one direction, no obvious source. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was gone. Not faded, just off. The silence after was weirdly sharp, like the air had been sucked back to normal. My ears popped. My wife came out into the hall with me. She whispered, "What the hell was that?" I didn't know. I went out on the front porch. Nothing. Dead quiet. No cars, no wind, not even crickets. Our dog didn't bark, and she barks at everything. The next morning over breakfast, we all talked about it again. Our son described it as a giant fridge hum floating over the house. That's honestly not far off. I checked the local Facebook groups for our area just to see if anyone else had posted about it. Nothing. I searched for posts with keywords like loud noise, vibration, weird hum. Not one person mentioned anything. I figured someone must have heard it. It wasn't subtle. That evening, I called our next-door neighbor, Joe. He's in his 70s, used to be an electrician, and still notices everything. I asked if he'd heard anything strange overnight. He said no. Said he was up till nearly 3 watching an old movie with his wife and didn't hear a peep. I pressed a little, told him we'd heard this loud hum and the windows shook. He laughed and said maybe I was dreaming. I asked our neighbors across the street the next day. Same answer. Nothing unusual. That's when it got weirder. 3 nights later, same time, give or take, it happened again. I woke up before it started. I was in that half-asleep place, like just starting to drift off, and felt this pressure, like a barometric drop before a storm. Then the hum came back. Same frequency. Low, deep, like it was inside the walls. I sat up and waited to see if the windows would move again. They did, just slightly. But this time the hum pulsed, like it was fluctuating. My wife sat up too. She didn't even say anything, just stared out the window like she was trying to see whatever was doing it. We stayed in bed, listening. Neither of us wanted to go outside this time. I don't know why, it just felt wrong. After maybe 40 seconds, it cut off again. Abrupt. The silence after was the exact same, like it had snapped back. I checked my phone, 2:19 a.m. The next morning, I checked our security cam footage. We've got two cameras, one above the garage and one pointed at the backyard. I scrubbed through the timestamp. There was a tiny flicker on the backyard cam at 2:17. Just one frame. The screen jumped slightly, like a brief glitch. No lights, no animals, no sound. The front cam was completely clean. No footage dropped, no movement, nothing. We asked our son the next morning if he heard anything. He said, "Yeah, it came back. I didn't get up this time, though." We asked if he saw anything, and he said no, just that the wall buzzed again. After that, we started keeping a notepad by the bed, just in case. Nothing happened for a week. Then it came back, a third time. Same hour, same exact sound. This time, I went out on the porch. I don't really know why. Something told me I should. The air was heavy, still no wind, no bugs. The hum was stronger outside. It felt like it was pressing down from above. I looked up. Nothing. The stars were out, clouds barely moving, but something felt off. I don't mean that in a dramatic way. I just had the sense that something was up there, too high to see, too quiet to track. The dog finally came to the door and growled. Low and steady. She didn't bark, just stared through the storm door. Then the sound stopped again. Same pattern. All or nothing. That was the last time we heard it. I kept checking with neighbors for days. Nobody else reported anything. Anything. I even asked in person at the school pickup line, at the gas station. People looked at me like I was asking about a dream. I know what I heard. I know what we all heard inside this house. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't power lines or construction or bass from a car, and it never showed up on the cams. I still check the footage sometimes, even weeks later, just in case something shows up that didn't before. So far, nothing has. I was walking back from the barn after putting the lights out, probably close to 11 p.m. The air was cool, and the grass was wet, not from rain, just one of those heavy dew nights. No wind, barely a sound except the bugs and the distant hum of the grain dryers. As I came up toward the house, I noticed something strange in the sky. It wasn't bright. In fact, I almost didn't see it at all, just 3 faint points of light moving together. If I hadn't looked up at just the right angle, I would have missed it. They formed a triangle, not sharp or glowing, just there. Dim, like stars through thin fog, but in a perfect shape and completely silent. It passed over slow. Not like a plane, more like a slow glide. It didn't wobble or change direction, just moved in a straight line from west to east, steady and smooth. I stood still in the grass for a long time, just watching it drift across until it disappeared behind the trees. No noise, no flashing lights, no trail, just those 3 points, and then they were gone. I didn't think much of it right then. I've seen weird stuff in the sky before. Satellites, weird cloud reflections, even military planes doing exercises at night. I figured maybe it was something like that. I went inside, made some tea, sat up for a while with the dog, and went to bed. Next morning, I got up around 5:30, same as always. Took my coffee out onto the porch before starting chores. Everything looked normal at first. Fog hanging low over the backfield, sun just starting to come up. But I noticed the cows weren't in the usual spot near the north fence. Normally they cluster around the hay ring in the mornings. Instead, they were all standing near the far south end of the pasture, the edge that backs up to the woods. At first, I thought maybe something spooked them, a coyote or maybe just a weird noise. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't milling around or grazing. They were just standing still, all of them, lined up along the fence, shoulder to shoulder, facing the same direction. Not a sound from any of them, not even chewing. I stopped at the gate and watched for a few minutes. That's when I noticed they were all looking in the exact same direction. Not toward me, not toward the barn, but off into the woods, southeast corner where the trees get thick fast. Not a single one turned their head or shifted their stance. I walked down the fence line, trying not to startle them. They didn't react, didn't even flick their ears like they usually do when I get close. I clapped once and a couple blinked, but none of them moved. It was like they were waiting for something. I didn't go into the field right away. I just stood there, feeling wrong, like I was intruding on something. Eventually, I backed off and went to get the ATV. Figured I'd drive the perimeter and check for signs of anything that might have spooked them. Maybe broken fence posts or tracks. The grass was undisturbed. No prints, no drag marks, no damage to the fence. I circled around the whole pasture and didn't find anything out of place, but the cows stayed put all day. I went out again at lunch and then around dusk. They'd shifted positions slightly by then, but most of them were still near the same spot, still oddly quiet. A few were grazing again, but the rest just stood there. Same direction, same weird stillness. That night, I sat out on the porch and kept watch. I didn't go to bed. I left the barn lights off and the house lights low. Around 2:15 in the morning, the dog started growling at the back door. Low, steady sound. Not barking, just watching the field through the screen door and growling. I stepped outside and looked up. I didn't see anything at first. The stars were out, clear sky, no clouds. Then I spotted it again. Same 3 faint points in the same triangle shape. This time, it was moving north to south, slower than before, maybe even lower. No noise, no trail. I watched it pass until it was gone again. The cows stayed near the same area for the next 2 days. Wouldn't come up to the barn. Wouldn't eat much either. I tried to herd them up, but they scattered quick and circled back to the same patch near the trees. On the 3rd morning, I found one of the calves standing in the center of the field alone, not injured, just staring off toward the woods. Same direction as the others had been, like it had been left behind or wandered out late. It wouldn't move for almost an hour, even when I walked right up to it. Eventually, things went back to normal. They started grazing all over again, came up to the barn for feed, acted like usual. But that southeast corner, they don't go near it anymore. Not even close. And I've stopped going out after dark. I woke up to silence. That was the first thing I noticed. No wind through the trees, no birds, no rustling. Just that weird kind of heavy stillness that makes your ears feel like they're plugged. It had rained most of the night, hard enough that I woke up a few times to check my tent seams. I remember falling asleep again around 2 or 3 a.m., listening to the last of it tapping the rainfly. When I unzipped the tent that morning, something felt wrong immediately. I was expecting puddles, mud, maybe my stove knocked over if the wind picked up, but instead, everything was laid out in perfect rows. My backpack, sleeping bag, camp stove, food bag, water bottles, boots, clothes, even the spare batteries, all removed from the tent and arranged in straight lines on the ground outside, sorted by type. Nothing stacked, nothing missing, nothing damaged, just spread out and organized like someone was taking inventory. And it wasn't just grouped, it was spaced out, like someone had taken their time to make it neat. Food on one side, clothes folded on the other, small gear like lighters and compass in their own row. I stared at it for a long time, half asleep, trying to remember if I had done it myself, maybe during the night, half awake. But I never unzip my tent in the middle of the night when I'm solo. Never. Especially not in the rain. The mud outside confirmed it rained hard. There were puddles and soft patches, and I should have seen my own prints leading out of the tent. Or prints from someone else, but the mud was smooth, no indentations, just a perfect wet surface, undisturbed. Even where the gear was sitting, the mud wasn't pushed down. The fabric on my sleeping bag looked dry. I picked it up. The underside was barely damp, like it had just been set down minutes ago. I sat back on my heels, looking around. My campsite was tucked in between a bend in the trail and a small slope. Trees to the west, creek to the east. I was at least 6 miles from the nearest access road. No other tents, no sounds of people. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal, obviously. The last time I'd seen another person was the afternoon before, a couple hiking the opposite direction. We said hi, that was it. I walked the perimeter of the site, did circles around where the gear had been laid out. Still no prints. I even checked under the clothes and gear again, like maybe the act of laying them down disturbed the mud. But there was nothing. I went back to the tent, my sleeping pad was still inside, zipped up. My notebook and headlamp were where I'd left them by my pillow. None of that had been touched. That's when it really started to sink in. Someone or something had to unzip the tent, unpack everything, lay it out, and zip the tent shut again, without leaving a single mark in the mud. I didn't want to eat, didn't want to boil water. I just sat on a log for a while watching the trees. Still no wind, no birds. The whole area felt, not frozen exactly, but paused. I decided to pack everything back up. I didn't rush, but I didn't take my time either. I was planning to stay out 2 more nights, but something about that spot didn't feel right anymore. When I reached the trail, I stopped and looked back. The campsite looked completely normal again. Tent down, nothing left behind. Except for one thing, a single piece of gear I know I packed. A small pocket knife I keep clipped inside my pack's hip belt pocket was lying right at the edge of the clearing, lined up perfectly with the imaginary rose from earlier, pointing east. I hadn't used it on the trip yet, and I always check that pocket when I break camp. It was clean, no mud, no scratches, just sitting there like whoever had moved my stuff left it for me to find. The trail out was dead quiet. Not just animal quiet, but no wind, no bugs, no sound of leaves underfoot, like I was walking through a sealed room. I kept checking over my shoulder every few minutes, but I never saw anything. After about a mile, the sounds came back. Slowly. First some wind, then the distant sound of water, then birds. Like I was walking back into a world that had been on pause. When I finally hit the trailhead, my car was the only one in the lot. I sat in the driver's seat for a while before starting the engine. Not because I was scared, exactly. Just trying to figure out what to do with what happened. I never reported it. Didn't tell anyone for a long time. Nothing was technically missing. Nothing happened to me. But I stopped backpacking solo after that. I still go hiking, I still camp, but not alone. And not anywhere near that trail. I was driving back from my brother's place in Franklin. It took longer than I expected, and I ended up on those back roads between towns around midnight. I'd driven that way plenty of times, so I wasn't too worried. Just me and the occasional deer on the shoulder. The fog started thickening maybe 15 minutes out from home. Not the rolling kind that drifts in patches. This was the low, dense stuff that clings to the road. It came in fast. 1 second I could see the tree line. Next, it was just the hood of the car and nothing beyond. I slowed down, not just for the visibility, but because something about it didn't feel right. The headlights were getting swallowed up way too fast. I kept glancing down at the speedometer to make sure I wasn't creeping too slow or too fast, but the road had gone weirdly quiet. No engine hum, no gravel crunch. I rounded a curve near an old dairy farm. That spot where the fencing's all half collapsed, and there's that leaning oak on the right, and that's when the light showed up. Just there. No flicker. No build. 1 second, just fog. The next, blinding white light directly in front of my windshield. Not up ahead, right in front of me, like I'd driven into a floodlight mounted to an invisible wall. I slammed the brakes. Didn't even think. Everything was white. I could see nothing else. Not the dashboard, not my hands, just light. Like it filled the whole cabin. It wasn't warm, it didn't make a sound, but it pressed in on me, like being underwater but dry and frozen still. I blinked a few times, held my hand up in front of my face. Nothing, just solid white. I don't know how long it lasted. Could have been 5 seconds, could have been a full minute. But then, just like that, it was gone. Dark again. Not a slow fade, like someone shut off a switch. My eyes were useless for a few seconds after that, totally shot. I sat there in the middle of the road, gripping the wheel, not sure if I was about to get rear-ended or what. When I could finally see again, I looked around. No lights anywhere. The road behind me was empty. No headlights, no glow in the fog, just my low beams cutting through a few feet of soup. The air in the car felt weird. Not hot, not cold, just heavy. Stale, maybe, like I'd been sitting with the windows up in a parking lot all day. I rolled one down and took a breath. Fog poured in. I started driving again, slower than before. The road felt different. I know how that sounds, but I swear the curve that should have come next wasn't where it normally was. I was so sure I'd missed a turn that I pulled over and checked Google Maps. According to GPS, I was still on County Route 12, on track. But something felt off. A few minutes later, I passed a billboard I didn't recognize. Completely blank. Just a white panel, no text, no image, no logo. I slowed down to look at it, and it looked brand new. Not weathered, not faded. Just blank. I looked it up later. There's never been a billboard on that stretch. Nothing in Street View history. As I got closer to town, the fog started to clear. By the time I hit the stoplight near the gas station, it was completely gone. Like someone drew a line in the air. Behind me, thick as soup. Ahead of me, clear as day. I pulled into my driveway just after 12:30. The weirdest part, My car clock said 12:34, my phone said 1:07. I double-checked it against the microwave inside. 1:07 there too. I didn't stop for gas, didn't pull over longer than a minute. That drive should have taken 20-25 minutes, tops. I don't remember losing time, I don't remember pulling over. I didn't fall asleep, but something ate up that half hour. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, just unsettled. I kept going over it in my head, trying to think of an explanation that made sense. A security light, a truck's high beams through the fog, but nothing fit. The light was right in front of me, like it came from nowhere, like it was inside the fog. A few days later, I drove that road again. Same time of night. Clear skies, no fog. I passed the dairy farm, slowed down at the same curve. No sign of anything unusual. The blank billboard wasn't there either, just an open field. I've driven that stretch at least a dozen times since. Never seen the light again. Never had that time discrepancy again. But I haven't taken that road in the fog since. If I see it starting to roll in, I take the highway, even if it adds 15 minutes. Just doesn't feel worth it. It was in July, maybe 5 years ago. I was out on the water with my cousin Gabe and two of his buddies, Ricky and Dan. We'd taken Gabe's dad's boat, a 24-foot center console, out from a little marina in Rhode Island. Not for fishing or anything, just a night ride. The water was calm and the sky was clear. No moon, just stars. It was one of those nights where you could see the Milky Way if you looked hard enough. We were maybe 12, 13 miles offshore. Far enough that the coastline was just a faint glow behind us. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Like no wind, no other boats, no engine since we'd cut it maybe 10 minutes earlier just to drift and hang out. I was sitting up near the bow, half dozing, when Gabe said something. "What the hell is that?" He was standing near the stern, squinting out past the starboard side. We all turned to look. At first, I didn't see anything. Then Ricky pointed. About 100 yards out, the surface of the water looked wrong. It wasn't a splash or a wave or anything, more like something was pushing up from underneath, slow and smooth. No sound, just this faint rise in the water, like a dome breaking the surface. Then we saw the light. It was dull, like a dim bulb behind frosted glass. Not flashing, just steady. Pale blue or white, hard to say. It got brighter as whatever it was kept rising. Nobody said anything for a while. We all just watched. The thing came up maybe 20, 30 feet out of the water. Not fast, almost like it was being lifted by a crane, if that makes sense. Smooth. Way too smooth. And it wasn't a perfect shape, not a sphere, not a disc. Kind of like a stretched out oval, maybe 10 feet tall, 15 feet wide. Hard to judge in the dark. It was rotating slowly, not spinning, just turning. Clockwise, I think. The light wasn't coming from a specific part of it. The whole thing sort of glowed evenly. It didn't reflect off the water like a spotlight would. It was more like the water just got less dark around it. After maybe a minute, the thing started going back down. Same speed, no noise, no splash when it submerged again. The surface just smoothed out like nothing had happened. We didn't talk for a bit after that. Gabe finally said, "Did you guys all see that?" We all said yes. No one was freaking out or yelling, just quiet. I think we were all trying to figure out if it had really happened. Dan reached for his phone, but he hadn't been filming. None of us had. It didn't feel like the kind of thing you could film anyway. The light didn't show up on the water the way a normal light would have. And the shape, it didn't cast shadows or have edges you could make sense of. We waited another half hour, drifting. Nothing else came up. No boats, no planes, just the same glassy ocean and stars overhead. Eventually, Gabe started the engine and we headed back in. No one said much on the way. I remember looking back over the stern a lot, though, just in case. When we got back to the dock, Dan checked his phone again. He'd tried recording some audio while the thing was still above the water. He played it for us, just wind and low boat creaks. No hum, no splash, nothing strange. Ricky swore he'd felt a vibration in his chest when it was above the water. Said it was like standing next to a big speaker, only quieter. The rest of us hadn't felt anything. Next day, we all talked again. No one had dreamed it. No one had been drinking. No one had any new explanation. I don't know what it was. I've been on boats my whole life and never seen anything like that. Not before or since. I was out hiking alone one weekend, trying to get some distance and clear my head. The trail I picked wasn't busy, just a loop through this patch of forest I'd never been to before, somewhere about 2 hours from the nearest town. Nothing fancy, just trees and dirt paths, the usual stuff. I'd been on the trail for a couple of hours when my phone died. No surprise, since I was using it for GPS. Luckily, I'd brought my handheld GPS device as a backup. I switched it on to check where I was and how much further I had. The screen lit up fine, but the map didn't look right. It was glitching, jumping back and forth between locations like it couldn't decide where I was. Weird, but not impossible. GPS can get iffy in thick woods or deep valleys. I kept going, but every time I passed through a particular clearing, the GPS went haywire. It would freeze, flicker, then snap back a few steps behind or ahead, like I was caught in some loop. At first, I thought maybe the device was faulty or some signal interference from the trees or something underground. It only happened in that clearing, though. The rest of the trail was fine. I stopped at the clearing to take a break. It was a small open space surrounded by tall pines. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, and the light was dimming. I pulled out some water, leaned against a tree, and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place. No trash, no obvious signs of people, just the usual forest smells and sounds. Birds chirping, the occasional rustle of small animals. But then I noticed something on the ground. Footprints. They were big, maybe a size 11 or 12, and they looked fresh. Clear prints in the soft dirt. What was odd was that the prints led into the clearing, but didn't go back out. It was like someone had stepped in and vanished. I checked carefully, trying to see if maybe they were covered by leaves or scattered off the trail, but there was nothing. The weirdest part was the shape of the prints. They weren't quite human. The toes were longer and thinner than mine, and the heel was wider, almost triangular. At first, I thought maybe it was an animal track, but it didn't match anything I knew, and the size was too big for most forest animals around there. I stood there for a while, feeling a bit on edge. The forest felt too quiet. Not just quiet, but like it was holding its breath. I tried to shake it off and started walking again, keeping an eye on the clearing. The GPS was back to normal now, no glitches. I passed through the clearing 2 more times on the loop. Each time, the GPS bugged out again, freezing or jumping around before settling back. And every time, those weird footprints were there, leading into the clearing, but never out. I didn't see anyone else on the trail the whole day. No other hikers, no campers. Just me and those footprints. When I got back to my car that evening, I tried to make sense of it all. The GPS, glitching only in that one spot, the footprints that didn't leave the clearing, it didn't add up. I checked online later to see if there were any reports about strange things in that forest. Nothing. No missing persons, no weird phenomena. I keep thinking about that clearing sometimes. About the footprints and the way the GPS acted like it didn't want me to be there. It wasn't anything flashy or loud. It's just this small glitch in the system and those tracks disappearing into nowhere. I don't go back there anymore. I was working as a park ranger out in the middle of nowhere, in a small cabin deep in the forest. It was the middle of a long, slow stretch of night shifts where I was basically alone except for the occasional hiker or camper during the day. This particular night was just like any other. Quiet, cold, the kind of night where the darkness feels heavier than usual. Around midnight, I first noticed this faint tapping sound outside the cabin. It wasn't loud, maybe just a couple of taps every few seconds, like someone was gently knocking on a wooden post or tapping a branch. At first I thought it was probably some animal, a woodpecker or a raccoon maybe, but the thing is it wasn't random or messy like animal noises usually are. It was rhythmic, almost mechanical in the way it kept a steady pace. Tap, pause, tap, pause. It didn't speed up or slow down. I got up and looked out the window. Nothing. Just the dark outline of trees swaying slightly in the breeze. No shadows, no movement that I could see. I stepped outside with my flashlight and scanned around, but the light didn't catch anything. No squirrels, no birds, no weird insects or animals that could make a tapping sound like that. The forest floor was dry. No rain had fallen for days, so it wasn't water dripping. The tapping kept going, steady, somewhere out there in the dark. I walked around the cabin a couple times, shining my light into the woods, trying to track down where the sound was coming from. But I couldn't pinpoint it. It seemed to shift locations, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, always just out of clear sight. Like the source was moving just beyond my flashlight beam, but quiet enough not to make any other sounds. I thought maybe it was someone messing around, like a prank or something. I kept an eye out for any footprints or broken branches that would show someone had been there. But when I checked in the morning, there was nothing. No tracks, no signs of a person or animal. The ground was untouched. The tapping didn't stop all night. I tried to ignore it and get some sleep, but every time I started to drift off, it pulled me back awake. It was quiet enough not to be annoying, but consistent enough to make me nervous. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see something standing there, but every time it was just the dark forest. At some point during the night, I swear the tapping changed rhythm just for a minute or two. It sped up slightly, then slowed down, then went back to its slow, steady pace. It was subtle enough I could have imagined it, but I'm pretty sure it happened. Like whatever was making the sound was aware I was listening. I never heard anything else. No footsteps, no voices, no rustling like someone moving through the underbrush. Just that tapping. No birds, no animals making noise. Even the wind seemed to die down. It was like the forest went quiet except for that one weird tapping. When the sun started coming up, I went outside again to check the area thoroughly. I circled the cabin and then followed a trail that led a few hundred feet into the trees, looking for any clue. Nothing. No footprints, no marks on trees, no signs of anything strange. I thought maybe I was losing it. That maybe the sound was something normal that I couldn't identify. But the strange thing is, I haven't heard anything like it before or since. And if it had been an animal or a bird, someone else should have noticed it, right? But no one ever reported anything like that in the park. After that night, I kept checking the spot around the cabin, listening closely, but the tapping never came back. It was like it was only there for that one night. I don't know what made the sound or why it seemed to be tapping right outside my cabin all night long. I just know that it felt deliberate, like something was trying to get my attention without showing itself. And even now, when I'm back home and the night is quiet, sometimes I swear I hear a faint tapping far off in the distance. I was out on a solo fishing trip in a pretty remote part of the country, somewhere I'd been a few times before, but never really alone. I like the solitude, the quiet, away from people and phones and all that noise. This trip was supposed to be the same. Just me, the lake, and a couple of days of nothing but fishing and camping. What happened wasn't anything I could explain, and honestly, I still don't really know what to make of it. I got to the spot just before sunset, set up my small camp on a little peninsula that stuck out into the lake. It was surrounded by dense forest, and the water was calm, perfect for fishing. I didn't get much cell signal, maybe a bar at best, so I knew I was cut off from the usual world for a while. I like it that way. After setting up, I pulled out my compass to double-check which way I'd be heading tomorrow for a short hike. I noticed something weird right away. The needle was spinning around and around, like full circles, not just jittering a bit. I thought maybe it was broken or something was wrong with the compass, but I hadn't dropped it or anything. It's an old but decent one, never gave me trouble before. Then a low humming sound started. It wasn't loud, more like a deep vibration that you could almost feel in your chest, like the quiet rumble of a far-off engine, but steadier, smoother. The compass needle kept spinning, matching the hum. I stopped what I was doing and looked around. No planes, no trucks, nothing visible that could explain the noise. The hum lasted maybe a minute or two, then just stopped. At the exact same time, the compass needle went completely still, pointing dead north, like normal. The silence afterward was almost too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. It was like the forest had held its breath. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was some weird magnetic anomaly or just a fluke with the compass. I put it away and went back to fishing. But the feeling didn't leave me. That low hum and the way everything just froze afterward, it wasn't normal. Later that night, I sat by the fire trying to shake the weird vibe. The sky was clear, stars everywhere. I kept thinking about the compass and the hum. At some point, I noticed a faint glow coming from the tree line across the lake. It wasn't like a campfire or a flashlight. It was steady, almost like a soft white light hovering just above the ground. I grabbed my binoculars and looked, but it was kind of hazy, hard to focus on. It didn't move, just stayed there glowing. I thought maybe it was a deer's eyes reflecting or some weird reflection from my fire. But when I turned the fire off to check, the light was still there. It didn't get brighter or dimmer, just sat there. I went back inside the tent, tried to ignore it, but sleep didn't come easy. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to that same low hum. It was louder this time, but still just that steady, deep vibration. I rolled over and checked my watch. It was exactly 3:07. The compass was on the ground by my sleeping bag. I grabbed it and saw the needle spinning again. Full circles like before. The hum lasted for maybe 5 minutes and then everything stopped again. The needle snapped to north and the hum vanished like someone flipped a switch. That silence was heavier than before, and I swear I could hear the sound of my own breathing really loud inside my head. When I finally looked outside, the glow across the lake was gone. I didn't see anything moving. No lights, no shapes, nothing. The next morning, I packed up to leave. I was eager to get back to a place with normal sounds, normal everything. I thought about telling someone about the compass and the humming, but it sounded ridiculous even to me. I double-checked the compass once more before putting it away. It worked fine, pointing north like it should. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the road behind me, half expecting to see something out of place, but there was nothing. Just empty highway and trees. The whole thing felt like a dream, or maybe something I imagined because I was tired and alone. I've thought about it a lot since then, and honestly, I don't have any answers. The compass spinning with the hum, the strange light on the shore, the silence that followed, none of it fits with anything I know. It's like something was there, watching or passing through, but never close enough to show itself. I kept the compass, by the way. It still works fine, except for one thing. Every now and then, I'll hear that faint hum again, usually when I'm somewhere quiet and alone. And when that happens, the needle starts to twitch. Just a little, like it's waiting to start spinning again. I work overnight security at a pretty big, mostly empty office park just outside the city. It's one of those places that's quiet after hours, with long, empty parking lots and a few buildings closed up tight. Most nights it's boring, nothing but the hum of distant traffic and the occasional flicker of a street lamp. But there was one night a while back when something happened that I still don't really understand. It started with one of the security cameras on the west side of the property. I was in the control room, watching the usual screens, empty lots, locked doors, no movement. Around 2:30 a.m., I noticed something on one of the monitors. A small, bright orb, kind of glowing white, moving slowly across the deserted parking lot. At first I thought it was a drone or maybe some kind of prank with a flashlight, but there was no sound at all, and it didn't behave like anything I'd seen before. The orb just floated smoothly from one side of the lot to the other, like it was drifting on air. No blinking lights or anything mechanical. I zoomed in on the camera feed, trying to get a better look. It didn't cast a shadow, didn't reflect off any cars, and didn't cause any ripples in the environment. No leaves blowing, no wind kicking up. It was just curious. I switched on the thermal camera overlay to see if it gave any clues. That's when things got weirder. The orb didn't show up on thermal. Usually anything bright would at least have some heat signature, like a flashlight beam, a car's headlights, or a person's body heat. But this thing was completely invisible on thermal. No heat, no disturbance, just a pure, glowing light. I sat there staring, feeling kind of dumb, but I kept watching. The orb continued moving slowly, drifting like a balloon caught in a breeze, but the air around it showed no changes on the heat sensor. No heat pockets, no warm air currents, nothing. And then, after it crossed the lot, it disappeared, just blinked out like someone switched off a light. I tried to check the cameras around it. Nothing else unusual. No other lights, no shadows, no people or cars. It was like the orb was the only thing out there. I rewound the footage to see if maybe something else was going on. But There was no sign of anything that could explain it. After that, I walked outside to the parking lot to see if maybe I missed something. It was completely empty and still, no weird smells, no marks on the ground, nothing. The asphalt was cold under my boots, and the night was calm, like any other. I looked for any signs, footprints, tire marks, trash, but found nothing unusual. The strangest part was that the cameras and sensors didn't pick up any disturbance around where the orb had been. No wind, no heat changes, no sound. It was like a ghost light floating through a vacuum. Over the next few nights, I kept an eye on that camera. Nothing else showed up like that. Just normal, empty parking lots and silent buildings. I mentioned it to my supervisor, but he just shrugged and said maybe a glitch in the camera or some weird reflection. I thought so too at first, but the footage was crystal clear. The orb didn't flicker or pixelate like a glitch. It was smooth and steady. Sometimes I think about that night when I'm sitting in the control room watching rows of empty lots. The silence, the stillness, and that glowing orb drifting silently through a place that should have been dead. I don't know what it was, and I'm not sure I want to find out, but it stuck with me, like a quiet reminder that not everything out there fits with what we think is real. I was out riding my bike late one night, something I'd done plenty of times before. I like the quiet, the way the streets feel different after midnight. Empty, calm, almost like the world's taking a breath. This night started the same. The air was cool but not cold, and the roads were empty except for me. I wasn't going far, just a loop I knew well, something to clear my head. I was probably about 10 miles into the ride when I first noticed the lights. At first, I thought it was just a car way behind me. The glow was faint but steady. 2 sets of headlights, nothing unusual, just far enough back to be out of sight in the distance. I figured it would pass me soon or turn off somewhere, but it didn't. As I pedaled, I glanced over my shoulder a couple of times. The lights stayed at the same distance behind me, matching my speed perfectly. I thought maybe it was someone just following the road too, going the same way. That happens sometimes, especially late at night. The thing was, the lights weren't acting like a car at all. No engine noise, no taillights, no change in brightness or angle, like headlights on a turn. They just stayed perfectly aligned with me, as if locked on. When I sped up a little, they sped up too. They sped up too. When I slowed down, they did the same. It was almost like they were watching me. I tried to tell myself it was just coincidence, maybe another cyclist with bright lights, or a car that was being extra careful behind me. But there wasn't a single sound to go with those lights, not even the faintest hum of an engine or tires on asphalt. After a few miles, I decided to stop at a red light. I slowed down, brought my bike to a halt, and looked back. The lights vanished instantly, like they disappeared into thin air. I waited a few seconds, heart starting to beat a little faster, then took off again. Right when I picked up speed, the lights reappeared a little ways back, falling into sync with my pace again. It was exactly the same as before. They mirrored every change I made, every turn I took. I tried to shake the feeling that something was off, but the way they matched me so precisely made my skin crawl. I rode through a couple of empty neighborhoods, streets lit only by dim street lamps and the occasional porch light. The lights stayed behind me the whole time. No sound, no headlights reflecting off anything else, just those 2 glowing points locked on. I started to check over my shoulder more often, trying to catch some detail that would explain it, but every time I looked, there was nothing but darkness where the lights should have been. At one point, I swerved sharply onto a side street to see if the lights would do the same. They did. They followed exactly. No lag, no difference in speed or direction. I wasn't imagining it. They were moving with me, matching me perfectly, but without any other sign of a vehicle or person. I began to feel genuinely uneasy, the kind of unsettled where your nerves tighten and your breath gets shallow. It was like being watched, but by something that didn't want me to see it. My hands gripped the handlebars tighter, and I found myself pedaling faster, hoping to lose whatever was behind me. The lights stayed with me. I took the long way home, cutting through back streets and alleys where the light was barely enough to see. The glow stayed steady just behind me, never moving closer, never falling behind. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of prank, Maybe someone with a powerful flashlight on a bike or in a car, but nothing made sense. No sound, no visible vehicle, no reflections, nothing. When I finally reached my street, I slowed down again, coming to a stop at the corner. The lights vanished like before. I waited a minute, heart pounding, then looked back into the dark road. No sign of anything. I rode the last block home as fast as I could, locked my bike up, and went inside without looking back. I've thought about that night a lot. The lights that followed me matching every move, disappearing when I stopped. It wasn't a car, not a bike, nothing I could explain. The quiet, the way they moved, the total lack of any noise or reflection. It still feels off, like something was out there watching me but not wanting to be seen. I keep wondering if I'm crazy or if maybe I was just tired and imagining things. But I know what I saw. The lights were real, and they weren't just behind me by chance. I set up camp alone that night, like I usually do when I want to get away from everything. It was late summer, just past the busy season, and I figured the spot I picked would be quiet enough. It was a small clearing in the woods, a little off the main trail, nothing special, but private. I pitched my tent, laid out my sleeping bag, and settled in for the night. The usual sounds of the forest were there. Crickets, distant frogs, a soft rustling of leaves when the wind kicked up. Nothing unusual. I was exhausted from the hike and didn't bother double-checking the zipper on my tent. I just zipped it closed, crawled inside, and fell asleep almost right away. When I woke up the next morning, it was still early, just the faint light of dawn creeping through the trees. I rubbed my eyes and noticed immediately that the tent zipper wasn't fully closed. It was open about a third of the way down, enough to slip a hand or head through if someone wanted. I sat up slow, heart starting to beat a little faster, and scanned around inside. Nothing seemed missing or disturbed. My bag was still where I left it. My phone and keys were right there on the floor next to me. I'm not the type to freak out over things like this, mostly because I've been camping a lot and know how wildlife and the wind can mess with tents, but this felt different. I hadn't heard a thing during the night. No noises, no rustling, no sniffing or anything that might explain how the zipper came undone. I pulled myself out and stepped outside, looking around carefully. That's when I saw it. A perfect circle of grass, maybe 3 feet across, right next to my tent. The grass inside that circle was completely crushed flat, like something heavy had pressed down hard on it, but nothing else was around. No footprints, no tire tracks, no broken branches, nothing. The circle was so precise it looked like someone had used a giant cookie cutter. It was weird enough to freeze me on the spot for a moment. I circled it, trying to figure out what could have done that. There were no animals big enough that I could think of nearby, no sign of anything crawling or stepping there. The ground was dry, no mud or loose dirt, so no prints anywhere, just that circle of flattened grass. I went back inside my tent and checked everything again. My gear was untouched, nothing out of place, no sign someone had been there other than the zipper and that circle outside. I was starting to get a little uneasy. I thought maybe I'd imagined leaving the zipper open, but the way it hung, slightly pulled down, didn't look like I'd left it that way. It felt like it had been undone from the outside and then closed a bit afterward. I ran my fingers over the zipper track. No snags, no dirt, nothing that might explain it unzipping on its own. I packed up quickly after that. I didn't want to hang around wondering what might have been outside my tent all night. As I walked back along the trail toward my car, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone. But there was nothing. The whole way home, I tried to shake it off. Maybe an animal did it. Maybe I'd just been careless and sleep moved the zipper without realizing it. Maybe the circle of grass was from something falling or a weird patch of ground that looked crushed. But none of it fit right. Later, when I got back to town, I even showed the photos I took of the circle to a couple of friends who camp a lot. They thought it was strange, but said it might be from a heavy bird or some animal landing there. But that didn't make sense to me. No feathers, no droppings, no other marks. I kept thinking about that circle of grass and the tent zipper. How something or someone could have been right there just outside without leaving any real trace. It's like whatever it was didn't want me to see it. but still made sure I knew it had been there. I still don't know what happened that night. I was on the last train out of the city, heading home after a late shift. The car was nearly empty, just a handful of people spaced out, mostly tired looking like me, trying to get back to their apartments or houses somewhere in the suburbs. It was late, maybe around 11:30 p.m., and the usual noise of the train was muted. Most people had their headphones in or were half asleep. I had the window seat, looking out into the dark as the train sped along the tracks. The city lights were fading behind me, replaced by patches of woods and empty fields. I was scrolling through my phone, but my eyes kept drifting to the window. There's something about the rhythm of the train and the blur of the night that makes you think, you know? Then I noticed it. At first, I thought it was a helicopter or maybe a drone hovering just beyond the trees, but it didn't have any blinking lights or the usual sounds. It was just there, floating silently, maybe 200 feet off the ground, not moving side to side, but staying perfectly steady as the train rolled past. I blinked and focused, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light or a reflection on the window. But no, this thing was out there, just hovering. It was a dark shape against the night sky, kind of oval, like a flattened egg, maybe 30 or 40 feet long. No lights or markings, just a smooth, matte surface that swallowed what little light there was around it. It didn't look mechanical the way a helicopter or drone would. It was more organic somehow, but without any details like windows or rotors. I kept watching, and it stayed with us just off the side of the train. When the train curved around a bend, the shape shifted its position slightly, but kept pace, staying the same distance away. It didn't speed up or slow down, just followed along. I glanced around at the other passengers, but nobody else seemed to notice. They were either looking at their phones or out the opposite window. I considered saying something, but what? Hey, there's a weird floating thing outside the window. It sounded crazy. The train rolled past a small rural station, one where the train usually slows down briefly. The thing stayed steady, and I caught a glimpse of its underside as it passed by. No engines, no landing gear, nothing I recognized, just that strange, smooth hull. I pulled out my phone to see if I could get a picture, but the screen's glow only made the window reflective, and every time I aimed the camera, the thing seemed to fade just a little, like it was aware of me watching. Then the strangest part, my phone lost signal. No bars, nothing. Usually I get spotty coverage out here, but this was total dead zone, and my GPS signal dropped out too. I looked at the little compass on the phone, and it spun wildly, as if it was confused. I tried to call my wife, but the call wouldn't connect. I sent a text. No delivery confirmation. The train started slowing for a bigger station ahead, but the thing just vanished. No flash, no sound, no sudden movement, just gone. I looked out where it had been, but the trees and dark fields were empty again. When the train stopped at the station, I checked my phone again. Signal was back, GPS locked in, calls and texts worked fine. I tried to show the other passengers, but they all just shrugged and went back to their phones. Later, I checked flight trackers online, just to see if anything unusual was logged around that area and time. Nothing. No drones, no helicopters, no aircraft registered in the skies. The next day, I asked a coworker who's into aviation if that kind of silent hovering was possible for any known aircraft. He said nothing with that size and silence exists, especially not in civilian airspace, and definitely not without being logged. I thought about it for days. I replayed the scene in my mind. The way the thing moved, the way my phone acted. It didn't make sense. It felt like some part of the world was acting weird, like the rules I thought were solid were bending just a little. I never told anyone else. People would think I was nuts or making it up. But every now and then, when I'm alone at night, especially on quiet train rides, I find myself looking out the window, half expecting to see that shape, hovering silently again. I was out on the lake, alone, like I often am on weeknights. Fishing at night isn't exactly a popular thing where I live, so it's usually just me, my boat, and the water. That night was late September, maybe 10 or 11 o'clock. The air was cool but not cold, and the lake was calm, No wind, no waves, just still water that looked like glass under the moonlight. I'd been out there for a couple hours, just drifting, casting my line, waiting. The night was quiet, except for the occasional splash or the hum of insects near the shore. I wasn't really expecting anything unusual, just the usual peaceful fishing routine. Around 10:30, I looked up and noticed something odd near the far edge of the lake, close to where the trees meet the water. There was this cluster of lights, arranged in a perfect triangle, maybe 30 or 40 feet across. The lights weren't blinking or flashing, just steady, like little white LEDs, evenly spaced at the points of the triangle and one in the middle. They were low, almost touching the water's surface. At first, I thought maybe someone had set up a fishing float line with lights or something like that, but there was no boat or dock nearby, no signs of any activity. The lake surface around the lights was completely still, no ripples or waves at all, which felt strange because usually even a stationary light on the water would create some kind of disturbance. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to get a better look, pointing the beam toward the lights from a distance. As soon as the beam hit them, the whole formation vanished. No flash or flicker, just gone. It wasn't like they dimmed or turned off, they disappeared instantly, like someone switched them off remotely. I sat still for a minute, blinking and scanning the area, but the lights didn't come back. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, or it was some kind of reflection. So I moved the boat closer, edging toward where the lights had been, shining the flashlight around slowly. Nothing. Then, after a couple minutes, the lights reappeared in the exact same triangular pattern, in the same spot, just floating on the water, no source visible. They still didn't move or make a sound. I reached for my phone to try and get a picture, but the screen flickered oddly, like it was struggling to focus in the dark, then went completely black. I fiddled with it for a bit, and it finally came back on, but by then the lights were gone again. I stayed there for the next half hour, drifting around the area, shining my flashlight in short bursts toward where the lights had appeared. Each time I pointed the beam, they vanished. When I turned it off, they returned. No pattern, no warning, just gone and back, like they were responding directly to the light. The weird part was how quiet it all was. No engines, no boat noises, no voices. Even the water was still, like the triangle was hovering without disturbing anything. If it was a boat or some human setup, there'd be at least a ripple or wake, but there wasn't. Eventually, I decided to head back to shore. As I started the engine, I kept glancing back at the spot where the lights had been, but they didn't show up again. The water stayed calm and dark, like nothing had ever been there. On the ride home, I tried telling myself I'd imagined it, or that it was some kind of strange reflection or light trick on the water. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't normal. No boat, no gear, just that perfect triangle of lights floating silently on the water, disappearing whenever I shined a light on them. I've gone back to the lake a few times since then, usually the same time of night, hoping to see something again or maybe find a logical explanation. Nothing, just the usual quiet water, no lights, no ripples, no sound. I checked with the local marina and other fishermen. No one else reported anything like it. The area is pretty remote, no boat traffic that late at night. There's no reason for lights like that to be out there, especially arranged so precisely. Sometimes I wonder if I should have stayed longer, tried to get closer, or maybe called someone to see it with me. But something about the way those lights vanished whenever I shined my flashlight made me not want to push it, like I was being watched, but no one wanted me to see. That night feels like a blurred line between what I know and what I don't. I'm not sure what I saw, but it stayed with me ever since. I was out for my usual evening jog through the neighborhood. It wasn't late, maybe just after 8 p.m., and the sun had already gone down. It was one of those quiet suburbs where everything feels kind of asleep by nightfall. Streetlights flickered on at regular intervals, and the houses all looked dark except for a few dimly lit windows. I liked running here because it was peaceful, and honestly, it helped clear my head after a long day. I had headphones on, but I kept the volume low, just enough to drown out my own breathing and footsteps. I was halfway through my usual route when I noticed a flicker of light behind me. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from a car's headlight or maybe a porch light blinking. But there weren't any cars coming down the street, and the houses around me were still dark. The light flickered again, faint, like a little spark way in the distance, and then it was gone. I slowed down and glanced back, but there was nothing there. Just empty street and shadows. No person, no bike, no car, no dog walker. I shrugged it off and kept going, telling myself it was probably just some weird trick of the streetlights or a bug flying close to the lens of my glasses. A few minutes later, the same thing happened. That flicker of light popped up again, just behind me, always just far enough away to be hard to see clearly. I turned around again, scanning the street, but the place was empty. The silence felt heavier than before. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I started paying more attention. Every time I glanced back, there was that flicker of light. Not every second, but often enough to make me uneasy. It never came closer, never changed position, and I couldn't tell what was producing it. It wasn't like a flashlight or a phone screen. It was too faint and too irregular, like a candle flame struggling in a breeze. I tried not to let it bother me, but the feeling of being watched crept in. My legs kept moving, but my head kept darting backwards. I checked the houses on both sides, still dark, no signs of life or movement. At one point, I stopped completely and listened. The street was silent except for the distant hum of a lawn sprinkler somewhere down the block. The light flickered again, farther this time, just at the edge of a cul-de-sac. I felt like I was being pulled toward it somehow, like it wanted me to notice it. I pulled out my phone and opened the flashlight app, thinking maybe I could catch whatever it was. I shone the beam back down the street, slowly scanning the empty road and sidewalks. The light vanished. There was nothing there. I started running again, but my pace was slower now, cautious. Every few seconds I'd catch that faint flicker behind me. It never came closer, never made any sound. Just that little light, like it was trying to stay hidden in plain sight. At one point, I reached the small park near the end of my route. It was completely dark, no streetlights at all. The trees made strange shadows that moved in the breeze. I stopped to catch my breath, and the flicker appeared again, just beyond the edge of the trees. I pointed my phone's flashlight toward it, and for a second, I thought I saw a shape. It was vague, just a silhouette that blended with the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. There was no rustling of leaves or movement, just silence. I didn't want to stay there longer, so I turned and jogged toward home, glancing over my shoulder the whole time. The light stayed with me, never getting closer, never leaving, just flickering softly like a distant warning. When I got back to my street, the flicker vanished. I stopped running and stood outside my house, trying to shake off the feeling. I locked the door behind me and sat down with a cup of tea, but the quiet from outside didn't settle inside my chest. That night, I kept waking up, feeling like someone was still there, watching from the darkness just beyond the window. I never saw the light again, but I'm pretty sure it's still out there somewhere, flickering just out of reach. I was flying a routine evening shift, just me in the sky, nothing fancy. I work as a small charter pilot, mostly short hops between regional airports, nothing commercial or fancy. That night, I was flying from a small town upstate to a city about 2 hours north. Clear weather, calm winds, perfect flying conditions. Around halfway through the flight, cruising at about 25,000 feet, I noticed something odd out the left window. At first, it looked like a reflection from my own cockpit glass, but then I realized it wasn't moving with me. It was a solid shape, maybe 2,000 feet away, and it just hovered there, perfectly still. No blinking lights, no engines or contrails, nothing that looked like a regular aircraft. I tried to focus on it more. It was completely smooth and reflective, like a mirror floating in the sky. I could see the faint outline of the sunset on its surface, but no structure or seams, just a dark, shiny shape hovering silently next to me. At first, I thought maybe it was a weather balloon or some sort of research drone, but it didn't drift with the wind, didn't change altitude or position. I changed course slightly, just a few degrees to the right, and it followed me, maintaining the exact same distance and angle. It was almost like it was watching me. I called the control tower, reported a traffic advisory, but they didn't see anything on radar. I told them about the shape, but they just told me to keep an eye out and maintain my heading. No other planes reported anything nearby. I felt a strange kind of unease, not panic, but definitely something off. I've flown at night and in weird weather before, seen things in the sky, satellites, planes, birds, but nothing like this. This object just stayed with me, matching my moves, but never closing distance or showing any signs of being a normal aircraft. After about 10 minutes, I radioed the company dispatcher and told them what I was seeing. They said they hadn't heard anything, no reports on radar, no other pilots mentioning anything unusual. I kept the object in sight and watched it silently for a while, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't until I started my descent toward the airport that the object vanished. No warning, no acceleration or movement. It just disappeared from sight. I scanned the sky, but it was gone, like it had never been there. The rest of the flight was normal, but I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see it again. When I landed and shut down the plane, I checked my flight logs and radar data again. Nothing unusual except for some brief signal interference at the time I saw the object. I've tried telling people what I saw, but most just shrug it off as weather balloons or hallucinations from long hours in the cockpit. But I know what I saw. Something real. Something that didn't fit any explanation I've ever encountered in all my years flying. Since then, I double-check my instruments and try to stay alert for anything out of the ordinary. But part of me wonders if that thing is still out there, watching, waiting, silent and still in the vast sky. We were up near Donner Pass early October, me and my friend Tyler. We'd planned a 2-night backpacking trip, nothing too intense, just far enough from the highway that you could pretend civilization didn't exist for a while. It was a Thursday when we headed out, and there wasn't anyone else parked at the trailhead when we got there. That's part of why we picked it. The first day was normal. Cool weather, clear skies, good trail conditions. We hiked maybe 5 miles in before setting up camp near this little clearing just below a ridge. It wasn't an official site, but it was flat and dry, and there was a good spot to hang the bear bag, so we figured it was fine. That first night, we ate freeze-dried chili, talked for a bit, then turned in around 10. It got cold, colder than I expected. I kept waking up every hour or so just to shift around in my bag, trying to warm my feet back up. Tyler slept like a rock. At some point, maybe around 3 or 4 in the morning, I remember lying there, half awake, hearing this faint popping sound. Not like branches breaking, more like distant static or that weird crackling you get when a campfire is dying out. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I sat up for a minute, trying to figure out if it was something real or just in my head, but then it stopped. The next morning, we both got up around 7. It was cloudy, which was weird, because the forecast had been clear. The air felt heavy, like before a storm, but it never actually rained. We were packing up when Tyler noticed the footprints. He was standing maybe 15 feet from the tent by the edge of the called me over. There was a trail of boot prints in the dirt, clear, recent ones, coming in from the trees. They matched the tread on my boots, and the spacing and depth looked about right too. They led straight to our tent. But there weren't any going the other way. I figured maybe I'd wandered out at night to pee and just didn't remember. But I checked my pants and they were clean, no signs I'd stepped outside. Tyler said the same. He was sure he hadn't gotten up once. We followed the tracks back a little, into the trees. They just stopped about 30 feet in, like whoever it was had walked in a straight line from the forest edge to the tent, and then vanished. No broken branches, no scuffed dirt beyond that point. Just nothing. I don't know how to explain the feeling that gave me. It wasn't like we saw something obviously dangerous, but the idea that one of us or someone else had been walking around the tent at night without leaving, that messed with my head. Tyler got quiet after that. He's usually the one cracking jokes and talking constantly, but for the next couple hours, he barely said a word. I asked if he wanted to hike out early, but he said no. He wanted to finish the trip, maybe sleep at a different site the next night. So we hiked on. Another 4 miles deeper into the woods, up onto a higher ridge where there were more open views. The trail was tougher, more switchbacks, but we both felt better once we were moving. The second camp was smaller, surrounded by thick trees. No open clearing this time. We picked a spot just off the trail and got set up. I kept checking the ground near the tent, looking for tracks, but there weren't any. Just our own back and forth from the fire ring to the bags. That night, we made pasta and sat around talking about normal stuff again. Bands we liked in high school, weird teachers we remembered. It felt like the first night had just been some weird one-off. Maybe a trick of the light or an animal that left oddly shaped prints. I didn't know. I woke up again around 3 a.m. Same as before, half awake, cold, uncomfortable. But this time, there was something else. A low sound, not quite a hum, like a deep tone just barely at the edge of hearing. It came and went, kind of pulsing, almost like it was vibrating the air. I thought maybe it was wind pushing through the trees, but when I held my breath and listened, the branches weren't moving. It lasted maybe 10 or 15 seconds, then faded out. I turned to ask Tyler if he heard it, but he was out cold. I sat there in my sleeping bag, not moving for a long time, just listening. Nothing else happened. In the morning, the clouds were gone and the sky looked normal again. We packed up quietly and started the hike back. Neither of us brought up the sound or the footprints. We didn't have to. Back at the car, we both checked our boots again, just to be sure. Same tread as the prints we saw. But that only made it worse. Because if it was one of us, we'd remember. And if it wasn't, there weren't any other vehicles at the trailhead when we got back. No hikers passed us on the way out. Just us and the woods. I worked the night shift at a small gas station just outside town, the kind of place where the streets are empty and the only sounds come from the occasional car or the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. It wasn't a bad job, mostly quiet, but sometimes that silence got weird. One night, maybe a few months ago, I was doing my usual rounds, checking the pumps, sweeping the floor, making sure the bathrooms weren't a disaster. It was close to 2 a.m., and I was the only one on site. The store was small, nothing fancy, just a few aisles with snacks, drinks, and the usual stuff. The security cameras covered the pumps, the inside of the store, and the parking lot. I kept an eye on the monitors out of habit, even though nothing really happened here after midnight. Around 2:05, I noticed something strange on the security feed for the parking lot. There was this sudden bright flash of white light, like a camera flash, but way bigger and brighter. It didn't last more than a second, but it lit up the whole lot like daylight for that brief moment. The weird part was that the timestamp on the footage jumped forward 6 minutes, from 2:05 to 2:11:12. It was like the camera skipped over those 6 minutes entirely. I rewound the tape, played it again, but it did the same thing every time. 1 second I'd see the flash, then bam, 6 minutes missing. The footage right before and after looked normal, no glitches or anything. I thought maybe it was a malfunction in the camera or the recorder, but everything else on the system was working fine. The audio didn't pick up any unusual sounds either. No static, no hum, nothing. I went outside to check the lot, just in case something had happened out there. The pavement was dry, no tire marks or footprints that didn't belong. The pumps were fine, nothing damaged or out of place. I looked up at the sky, clear, a few stars, no clouds. There wasn't a plane or helicopter flying over, at least none I could see or hear. At first I figured it was just some weird electrical interference or a power surge messing with the cameras, but the timing was too exact. 6 minutes to the second missing from the timestamp. That stuck with me. Later, I checked the logs from the gas station's computer system. No transactions, no door alarms, no motion alerts for that time frame. The lot was empty the whole time, and the cameras showed no cars pulling in or out during those missing 6 minutes. It was like nothing happened. I told my manager about it the next day, but he just brushed it off as a tech glitch. Said cameras sometimes mess up, especially older ones. I tried to drop it, but something about it kept nagging me. Over the next few nights, I watched the footage from the same camera closely, hoping to catch whatever caused that flash or the missing time. Nothing. No flashes, no jumps, just the same empty parking lot and quiet nights. But then, A few nights later, around 2 a.m. again, I noticed something else. On the video feed, a shadow moved just outside the frame near the edge of the lot. I only caught it for a second, like a figure standing still, but it wasn't in any of the other camera's views. I checked the angle, and it seemed impossible for anyone to be there without being visible from another camera or by me outside. I went out and walked the whole perimeter, but there was nothing. No footprints, no signs anyone had been there recently. After that, I started feeling like I was being watched during my shifts. Not in a usual way, like someone standing right there, but more like a presence beyond sight. I'd hear noises, small things like a faint rustling or the distant buzz of something electronic, but when I looked, nothing was around. The night after I saw the shadow on the footage, I decided to sit outside for a bit during my break. I figured maybe I was just going stir crazy in the store. It was a clear, cold night, and I was leaning against my car, watching the lot. After a while, I noticed a small, dim light flickering in the distance beyond the edge of the gas station's property, near the tree line. It wasn't a car or a flashlight, just a steady, blinking white light. I thought maybe someone was camping or doing something back there, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked over, staying close to the edge of the lot. The light disappeared as soon as I stepped off the pavement and into the grass. I called out a few times, but no answer. It felt like it was gone before I even got close. I got back to the lot and tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a flashlight from a nearby campsite or some reflection from a distant road. But the whole thing didn't sit right with me. The next day, I pulled the security footage from that night to see if the light showed up on camera. I watched the timestamp closely. At exactly 2:03:45, the camera caught a bright flash again, similar to before, but this time it was fainter, like a dull glow. Again, the timestamp jumped forward, this time 4 minutes missing, from 2:45 to 2:07:45. The footage after the jump showed the lot empty, no signs of anything out of place. I started writing down the times these flashes and jumps happened. There wasn't a pattern I could make sense of. Sometimes 6 minutes missing, sometimes 4, sometimes just 2. The flashes happened only at night, always in the early morning hours, and only on that one camera covering the parking lot. I began feeling less safe there, not because I thought someone was going to rob the place, but because of how quiet and wrong it felt. Like something was just beyond my vision, messing with the cameras and maybe with me. One night, near closing time, I heard a soft hum outside. It wasn't like a car or a machine, more like a steady vibration in the air. I stepped outside and scanned the lot. The hum got louder for a few seconds, then stopped. I didn't see anything unusual, no lights, no movement, just the night and empty pumps. I kept watching the cameras for a while, hoping to catch whatever was causing this, but every time I looked, the footage showed nothing except empty lot and the usual flickering of the streetlight. The last night I worked there, about a week ago, the flash happened again. Bright white light that filled the screen for a second. The timestamp jumped 6 minutes again. I watched the footage right after, paying close attention. Then, at the edge of the frame, I thought I saw a shape, just a dark blur moving slowly out of view. I rewound and played it back several times. It was subtle, maybe just a trick of light, but I swear it wasn't there before. I left my shift early that night, feeling shaken. I haven't gone back since, and I'm not planning to. Every time I think about it, about those missing minutes and the flashes, I get this strange feeling that something was there, something I can't explain. I checked the footage one last time before deleting it from my phone. The bright flash, the missing time, the blurry shape, all still there staring back at me from the screen. I don't know what it was or why it happened, but I know it wasn't just a glitch. I was out on a weekend hike by myself, nothing fancy, just the usual trail I like to take near the ridge. It's quiet there, not many people go that far, especially this time of year. I'd started in the late afternoon and was making my way up the switchbacks as the sun was dipping lower. The air was cool and still, almost too still for late spring. About halfway up, I stopped for a break near a small clearing. That's when I saw them, dozens of birds, just lying there in the dirt, not scattered around either. They were arranged in this perfect circle, like someone had placed them there on purpose. I'm not exaggerating, the circle was almost flawless, maybe 15 feet across. All kinds of birds, too, nothing specific. Sparrows, finches, maybe a couple of crows, all just dead. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of it. No blood, no broken wings, no signs they'd been attacked, just quiet. And the weirdest part was this fine gray dust covering their feathers. It looked like ash or maybe pollen, but it wasn't blowing around or coming from any nearby tree. It just coated them evenly, like a powder. I reached out with my glove, touched one carefully. It felt dry, almost chalky. I looked all around, thinking maybe there'd be something explaining it. A nest nearby, a predator's lair, a trap. Nothing. No footprints except mine. No disturbed plants or branches, no smell of decay or fire. My heart started to speed up, but I kept telling myself to stay calm. Maybe it was some kind of weird disease outbreak or environmental thing. Still, I've hiked a lot and never seen anything like this. I took out my phone to take pictures, but the battery was low and the signal was spotty up there. The photos came out oddly, too, like the dust reflected the light strangely. In some shots, the circle looked almost brighter than it did to the naked eye. I didn't want to stay too long. The sun was slipping fast and the forest was getting darker, but something about that scene kept pulling my eyes back to the circle. I took a few steps back, then turned around. That's when I noticed the silence. Not just quiet, but this thick, heavy silence. No birds singing, no rustling leaves, nothing. Usually, even late in the day, you'd hear something. Bugs, animals, the wind through the trees. But there was just this eerie stillness, like the forest had stopped breathing. As I headed back down the trail, I kept glancing over my shoulder. It felt like I was being watched. But every time I looked, nothing was there. No movement, no eyes shining in the underbrush. Just me and the darkening woods. When I got back to my car, I checked the photos again. One of them showed a faint, almost circular blur above the birds, like a shadow or a haze, but I couldn't tell what it was. I tried zooming in, adjusting the contrast, but it didn't clear up. I told a few friends about it later, but they just shrugged it off. Said maybe I'd stumbled on a weird natural event or some prank. I don't know. I keep going over it in my head, trying to explain what I saw and felt. The circle, the dust, that silence. It doesn't make sense. I went back a week later, but the circle was gone. Just normal forest floor. No sign anything had happened there. It's like it was never real. I'm not sure what I stumbled on that day, and I don't know if I want to find out. But it's been on my mind since.